anything to help us?
That's a really good question because it was fascinating. Probably about 2 weeks ago, I know all my directors and myself just started getting this inbox full of Mayor hold, don't, we're not going to be able to talk about this grant you want to talk about. We're not going to be able to talk about everything's pause was the term. It was interesting because it made me realize how many people I have asked for money because my inbox was full of everything's on pause. We have taken that all into consideration. Our grants and things we usually get are one-time funding for a one-time project, and then we are budgeting to be able to self-sustain. So we feel like we're still okay right now, but we are keeping our eye on it. I think everybody's keeping their eye on it. We have concerns with our RDA. I mean, all these funds that keep us afloat are on pause. So I just tell everyone, stay calm. John Borges, stay calm, because it's just pause. We'll see what happens and we'll make the best of it. But yeah, we're right there with you. And the funds we're asking for or have asked for in the past have been one-time money so that we can build the airport and we can do these things. And then we're budgeting in-house to be able to keep them self-sustainable.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of our library, right? I mean, we want to keep our library self-sustainable, eventually get it to where it is just a well-oiled machine and the programs don't get impacted. That was the piece. I mean, we came up with our 4 last night, the impacts and what it means to the citizens and what it means to us. And let's figure out how to still deliver the level of quality we've been able to.
Yeah.
But it is a concern.
Yeah, because some of the one-time things we do are things that we probably would have done anyway, right? And we would have had to budget for those, but because the funds came in, we were able to jump on them and do them faster. And I'm looking cautiously at what it is that we're hoping to get done. It's just on us, which is good. We should.
Well, we'll
should always
budget
do
to
that.
what we have.
Yeah.
I mean, I have raised a band on a shoestring budget. I know how to go tight. And we're not afraid to have those hard conversations and get really surgical with our budgets. We've done it before.
Yeah.
The directors have been great.
So if what we have to do is put off a capital improvement project or something in order to maintain the services that we have, that's what we would be proposing.
Absolutely. Hit the pause button.
All right.
Yeah.
Other comments, Councillor Henley?
Yeah, just a comment about what Scott was sharing, especially about biking, with the TMAC discussions happening, which I think are really exciting. I don't know yet what the financial implications of going for gold might be, but I'm speaking obviously for myself, but I've always thought that, I know last year pedestrian safety was actually an envelope that we called active transportation. So it wasn't just pedestrian safety, it was also involving bike infrastructure and help there. I think last year's budget and the new school and so on required a lot of attention on pedestrian safety, and we're not done with those projects and needs. But I'm certainly comfortable with administration input on if that's your goal. I share that goal and would love to see that part of our budget priority that includes active transportation in a comprehensive sense.
It's a great committee. Did we put you on that committee, George?
I'm the liaison, to TMAC.
But we have formed this committee just to focus on going for the gold. What are the requirements? Provo City is a bronze right now. So we looked at those requirements. What would it take to get there? How can we start working towards that? And I'm just not patient when it comes to this. I'm like, let's just go for it and see if we can get there in the next few. And they're just like, Mayor, slow, easy. So it is a lot. It's a big lift. but it's so important for the bike walk, and we need to be gold. In 10 years, we'll have 9 years, we'll have the Olympics here, and we want to be way ahead of that. We don't want them to come in and say, you know, shame on you, you don't have, no, we're gonna be like, look what we've done to prepare, we're ready to go. So we're gonna get there.
It's great.
Councilor McKay.
My initial reaction to that is, well, first of all, Olympics are in the winter. I don't know how
Hey, I bike year round.
you do.
But
I mean, right now we're asking citizens to pay a lot more in their water and have the infrastructure needs. That really rubs me wrong. That would be prioritizing the status of gold with something as opposed to getting our infrastructure fixed. I just think it's like, I don't know, that rubs me wrong.
Some of the lists, and we can get the gold requirements. Some of them are pretty basic and simple to do, like restriping
I
something.
guess I would need to see like a dollar amount, but.
And we don't even have that yet, do we, Scott?
Vern is kind of leading up the committee. And so we've got a good chance that we're going down the criteria to get to gold, but you can do that. I have not seen anything, and I asked the same question, Catrice, because even though George may be looking for more dramatic things to spend more money on in the budget, I'm the exact opposite. We're trying to, yeah, this is going to be a tough budget year. There's no doubt about it, you know, and we used a lot of what I called poker chips last year, and there was a great involvement in departments and efficiency and all that. But these are, since they're early in the process, I don't know if we have those costs, but you know, we're sitting in a building right now that is net zero and all electric. And if we would not have had at least that objective and known that, now there may have been a time somewhere along that would have been too expensive, and we would have had to talk about that. And I felt like in running this project that I had a leader that would have listened to those type of reasons, you know, if there isn't there. So it's an objective and a thing to go, but I have not seen anything that makes us make that exact choice.
And I think focus on like the low hanging fruit. Let's start the canopy and stuff.
Well, everyone is hurting. I think it's a huge deal to ask for any increase in utilities, everything. But we're also, you know, there's also just realities where our money isn't going. So we're dealing with inflation, just like the citizens are dealing with inflation. So I think there's probably a lot of aspirational things that we're not going to be able to tackle.
I don't care. 9 years to do this one in.
Okay.
And the beauty of it is, it's being on the Olympic board is fun. No, you don't need to. I'm loud. Being on the Olympic board is fun because when they throw money up, I can fight to get it. I mean, every other venue in the state is running off the Olympic Legacy Fund except us. We are the only self-sufficient venue in the Olympics. So for when the time comes and I need some money to help get us ready, I think the ask is going to be, I have a good argument, is what I'm saying, to get some money. The hope is, because that's my motto, is not take it out of, I hope we don't have to take it out of the general fund or the taxpayers, heavens no. My hope is I can grab some of that legacy fund, because we've already taken care of ourselves for years and they haven't had to send a dime down here. So we might need a dime.
And so is it the case that if we go ahead and make these plans, see what we want to do, because we have a plan in place, we would be more, or would be better candidates for receiving funding?
It's always that, regardless of the ask, the question is always, are you shovel ready? You know, you hear that term a lot in government. So this committee that we put together, they're working on the plan. So when the time comes, if we need funding of some sort, Mayor, is Provo shovel ready to put a plan into action? Here's the plan. It is just, we're doing the legwork right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of things on the transportation and the bike infrastructure are really like upgrades to the existing infrastructure that we have that makes it safer for all of our road users, right? And reduce traffic conflicts, accidents, things like that. So yeah, I like the idea of having a good plan.
Yeah, we want to be ready and we want to be organized. We kind of have that reputation. with Scott running the venue for years and years, that Provo, we come to the table ready to go. We don't need a lot of help. Come ready to go.
And so I'm with my situation down on 500 West, where we're going to open a big Walmart, and I've got an offset intersection that is very, very scary. The road on 5th West narrows significantly, and 1560 and 1570 don't line up. And as my people try to make left-hand turns, they nearly get hit because they cannot see. And so spending more in bike infrastructure and making this bold and not taking care of some of these offset intersections that are safety risks on an arterial road makes me concerned, because then we're putting more emphasis on bike safety rather than you guys are dumping more and more and more onto this road and not fixing the problems that are there. So that's my concern.
So that is not what we're doing at all. We are not ignoring what's going on Lakeview Parkway. It is a priority. We talk about it all the time.
This is 500 West, not Lake Parkway.
Yeah, and Bill and Gordon are back there chatting away because we talk about it all the time. Do you want to speak to it, Gordon, what we're doing with it? Just so she gets a little bit of information.
Of course, director. And so Becky and I have talked about this intersection. It's an offset. The city has purchased one of the homes on the corner and has put together a design to do a roundabout there. We're now rethinking that maybe it needs to be a signal. So we're doing a redesign to look at it that might be about half the cost, depending on how much right away we need to get to do that. And so we're putting together a list of what we call top tier projects, not necessarily saying 1, 2, or 3, but some are $500,000 projects, some are millions, some are 2 million, just different ones that if when funding or matching becomes available or other kinds of funds are freed up, we have one designed, ready to go. We know where the right of way is. We can start, just like the mayor said, be ready. So this is one of the projects that we're going to know exactly what the right of way is. And we'll make a decision between the signal versus the roundabout. And I believe we're about a month or 2 before we have that design and kind of the cost before that's ready.
Thanks, Gordon. So do we still need to do what we talked about, like have everybody offer up one project in their district and then have us vote on the top 3, or you guys have that figured out? Or
so right now we're taking our discretionary funds, and as a result of the council's action here, even though you didn't make any action, we saw that your top 3 included sidewalks for schools. We're focusing our money towards other sidewalk projects. There's a few matching projects that we're including in there, including the 820 North Bridge and the UDOT raised grants, and a few other things to match, because whenever we can leverage funds, we make that a priority. But so in this year's budget, we have it allocated, we'll bring it to the council, and the council gets to act. You're going to ultimately say if we pick the right projects or if there's something we've missed that we need to go back, but the council can certainly direct that if that's the decision. We're trying to follow what this we think is pushing us towards.
so if we did not get the grant for that match that you were talking about, it would go towards sidewalks and not necessarily a project.
Right, because right now I'm going to take the vote of the council as a whole as to the direction we should go. And of course, I include the administration in their support of the sidewalks and so forth and safety in those aspects. So we're not crossways on this, but if the council has a different priority project, we are not here to battle you on that, but we're here to accomplish those things. I don't know if that's clear.
Thank you, Gordon and Becky. And thank you, Scott Henderson. Great additions to and comments on focus on our priorities and adding some thoughts of your own administration's helpful input. So relative then to our third, we'll come back to employee retention, but any other comments on active transportation, pedestrian safety, any other drill down ideas or comments as we further this priority, council priority for the coming year?
Chair Garrett, so this is essentially very slightly modified language from last year, so prioritizing supplemental grant money to go towards matching funds so that the most bang for the buck was used, and then additional would go towards sidewalks. I think Scott Henderson made that point, that was a great example of kind of this overarching direction that the council gave last year. And Gordon and his team have come back and showed where they've been able to put those dollars that have made huge dividends for the city. And so if that is the will of the council, we've kind of left that the same, leaving just kind of this discretionary language up for implementation of public works, but letting them know that we want them to get the most for what they can with those dollars. And if they can't, those safe walking routes for private roads.
And I think that's great. We didn't vote to add active transportation though, and I think we need to prioritize sidewalks and schools.
Okay.
Could we have a vote on that? I mean, I don't know.
Maybe define that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We don't have any numbers yet from the administration. But I don't know if there are grants that would.
Well, any grants we're gonna do, doesn't matter what they are.
Well, I was gonna say there might be some grants that include active transportation.
Absolutely, there will be, and we're gonna do those. But we know everything's gonna be tight. Anything that we're putting extra funds on that's not a grant thing, our priority is sidewalks and schools. And we need that to be narrow because our money is narrow.
Well, and I would just add and say, remember that the purpose of the discussion is just to set your priorities, right? I mean, as Scott mentioned before with the tight budget, you might come up with 5 priorities and none of them might get funded. You're not really deciding right now what's going to get funded and what's not. You're telling the administration in what order you want them to put things into the budget to the degree that they're even able to. So to some degree, you don't really need to know what the proposals are or how much they're going to cost or any of that stuff, because the administration doesn't know any of those things. And they can't answer the question. You're just trying to give them guidance about what order to fulfill your policy objectives.
Right.
So, I mean,
That's how I view it.
so my point is, if there's something you want on the list, add it to the list and tell them what order it goes on in the list. You can add 10 things to the list, and that's, one thing and 10 things is fine as long as there's an order, because it's all going to be about how, the process that they go through to actually start adding things.
So I was seeing, Catrice, active transportation. I was seeing sidewalks and schools really just as a component of active transportation.
No, that adds you're adding a ton more things in there. So like, if we're having limited money, want to make our priorities, they need to be condensed. And if we get more money, great, let's go to town. Like, but if we need to think of the very first thing we want that money spent on as a priority, and the vote came in as sidewalks and schools.
So that's fine. I'm Justin to go ahead and leave it as pedestrian safety, to just be more clear about where the priority lies, and since that's what we talked about before. Well, let's move to employee retention then. Any additional thoughts, drill down ideas relative to this, Justin?
Yeah, so the council spoke about this at a pretty high level back at the meeting in January, and really what I had kind of set this up was to delineate whether this was something that the council was looking for funding of additional new positions for officers and or firefighters, or if this was strictly retention of current employees. And if that is the case, I've had some conversations with Daniel Softly, and he has some ideas that he will be presenting
in March. So
As part of his.
presentation, yes. So, I just wasn't sure what, I think we say employee retention and look at public safety personnel, and that might mean something different for different individuals. Because I know we've had that conversation about, you know, do we need more officers? Do we need more firefighters? We've also had the conversation of, well, specifically on the firefighter side, we've gotten more firefighters. What is the priority, the planning and anticipated funding when those grant funds go away? Or is it ensuring that we keep the current positions filled that we have with the current employees that we have in the traditional sense of employee retention? So, so I don't know if there's a desire to drill that down to make it more broad and vague, which I don't know if there's a fine balance of where that becomes helpful for the administration, being more detailed or less detailed, but that was my takeaway from it, but please, these are your priorities.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Justin. Counselor Baldwin.
So I guess at this point, I'd like to hear from the administration on how they view that, because we've funded officers the last couple of years and it is tight, and it was tight last year. Is it a better priority to get a couple more officers or to hold off for another year? Or is it a better priority to make sure we retain what we have?
I'll speak to that.
Yeah. You're fine.
So every time we do this, you know, we meet with the directors and say, tell us, what are your budget priorities? We need to hear from you because we are concerned in their day-to-day lives. On the police, it'll be interesting to see what they bring to me. And if they say, no, I have 114 officers right now, I'm funded for 8 more, I'm having a hard time finding those positions, they might come forward and say, we want to focus more on something else instead of asking for more officers. I don't know, Georgia's probably the only one that was on at the time. Do you remember when Chief Ferguson came and said, this is the one year I'm not going to ask for officers because I need to take some money and get everyone right. He did that 1 year. So we'll just support Chief and see what his needs are and his asks. They're in the middle of a big evaluation, just like every department is right now, so that they can come with their priorities. Scott, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. Market study is coming down the pipe, and that'll tell us exactly where we stand and what commitments we may have to be competitive. And just from talking to Daniel Softly, HR director, I know there was a discussion with police that, you know, Chief Beebe talks about, I know I have this many police officers right now that is in the budget. And if I can't recruit that, then making retention and recruiting more solid by moving over and getting wages and retention taken care of seems to be the short-term solution now to solve that. And then you can always come back to the increase in force. It seems like it might be a choice. It might be a choice of priorities within a given year.
But we're just talking about police. What about fire? Because we can't leave them out. What about fire? 2 comments on the fire.
I think council has always been tremendous with public safety and listening to the needs. And as they come forward in their budget reports and what they do, there are some grants that they've received that have I guess, bought some time and purchase and staffing at once, which we'll have to think about that in the future. I know there have been years in Provo's budget times, I wasn't in this position, where we have made major additions to police or fire forces in the past. And that has just become, just like what we're talking about this year, part of the budget reality. So I think it's all collected, and even we focus on public safety, but there are staffing needs everywhere, you know, so that is something that is a major balancing. We're about ready to bring on major plants and processing and treatment plants and all that. So we've got a lot of these things happening, and it is just part of the budget balancing process.
So is it better for us to, in your opinion, because you guys run this, You guys meet with those people often, like Chief Levy, the fire chief and all that. What would your recommendation be, to focus on retention or to focus on maybe fire?
Yeah, I think it's definitely working with the department on their feelings. I think, Becky, I feel like you're on to the concept that even if you have 120 positions, but you cannot fill them, with the compensation that you have, do you really have 120 positions? To where I think making sure that we are right in the market seems to me, and in some of our discussions, public safety seems to be the right solution to get ourselves right in the market.
Okay, so looking at more retention rather than adding additional employees. And see, that's how I would feel, because it's a tough year, it's been a tight year, they've had to scrape to get our retention and to get the COLA rates. I just, at some point, we're gonna have to really drill in and look at that, and I really don't, I can't answer for Chief Beatty and I can't answer for Chief Hedman on what their priority would be, and I don't want to go and mandate something that they necessarily can see going a different direction would be better for that department. I guess that's where I sit.
Two questions. So if the recommendation from either of those departments is to fund additional positions, would you bring us a proposed budget that funds those without the need for a property tax increase?
We did last year.
We funded additional positions in that, just the two. Yeah, and the year before we paid for it with the increase. So that's really good. The other one is, do we have a sense of how many of our FTEs and part-time employees are funded through grants? So like CBDG, Melissa McNally, or our Boca people who were here just now. Like if we needed to, as a city, pay for those positions, if grant funds are cut off, are we looking at that in our budget?
So we've got those numbers. I've heard Melissa tell me her numbers. I've heard all the different entities. Bill's nodding because we asked for those numbers. And that's definitely something we can get you if you would like that report.
Yeah, because they do important work in our community, right? We're partnering with the government to kind of be like a pass-through, right? To make sure those services are here. I think those services are important.
Oh, they're critical.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Does that help, Justin?
A little bit. I've got this highlighted up on the screen. Does this, I guess, tie this up in a bow nicely enough of supporting the recommendations of public safety departments to retrain and recruit employees, since we haven't heard from them yet? Is that?
Yeah.
Maybe just add one thought to that. I mean, my only caution is that I know most department directors don't like to make recommendations where they push the budget beyond what is the most careful position. And sometimes in effect, that sort of feels to me like, we're not actually giving them permission to move the needle. I don't pretend to know how that might work, but I just want him to feel encouraged to ask for what he needs. And if we have to say no, we have to say no. But if he doesn't want to ask, then it often isn't as helpful to know how we can be of greatest service. I mean, if he says, this is my dream scenario, this is my realistic scenario, here's my scarcity scenario, that might be helpful to us just to get a sense of what he really, because even if we can't do it this year, right? It's what is the longer term picture looking like?
Who is George?
What's that?
Who is he?
I'm talking about Chief Beatty.
So we're not looking at fire as well?
No, we'll look at.
Well, both, yeah.
Okay, so both they.
Sure.
All public safety, including dispatch. That's part of it.
They're both listed. Public safety.
Yeah, and also, I mean, something that's been really fun. So look at the directors, they're probably like, that's not fun. But literally, we have been we meet all the time, and we started a new program. We started it right when Scott came in, because He was tasked with revamping this budget and let's get everyone around the table. All the directors are in the room in January. And they get the monthly reports of where our budget is, how much what is it, the sales tax, they get all of that. Before they weren't at the table until kind of the last little bit. They know every single thing that's going on. And so as they prepare their budgets, their eyes are wide open. Because they can see where we're at, what's going on in the market, what's going on with sales tax, all of those things. So they're much more informed and prepared to make smart decisions on their own budgets. And again, we support their budgets. They come and we just say, show us your budget. How are you doing? Where do you need help?
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. All right. Good. Justin, we'll plan to review this again in another month or two and kind of see where we are with some of these goals and priorities.
Just one quick question.
Mhm.
To the housing and owner occupancy piece, would you like something added? There was some discussion around review of surplus property and potentially putting that into a fund. Is that something you'd like added to this spread? It sounded like there was some general consensus, but I don't want to take anything for granted.
Gary, do we take a
John
vote?
did agree to do a review of the last 2 years to collect data to see kind of what we're looking at there relative to property that's been sold. That could be a starting point.
Now, do we even need to come back or are we done?
Well, I would just be interested in seeing and making sure that we're meeting our goals that we've set today relative to the RFQ for the software. Once we hear from the department heads, it's just to touch bases, I think.
I think we can do that, but do you feel that these are the council's priorities? I think that's the Councilman Case getting at. I think we lost one, but I think a vote in that sense would be helpful to give the administration some direction and kind of formally pass these on as we've done in the past, but we'll bring them back.
Okay.
That if everyone feels strongly.
Okay, sure. We can call for a vote relative to this updated edited list of priorities for the council. So we'll call for a vote. I'm starting with Councillor Baca.
Yes.
Councillor Garrett, yes. Councillor Hanley?
Yes.
Councillor McKay?
Yes.
Councillor Christensen?
Yeah.
This is on.
Councillor Hoban?
Is he? Oh, yes.
Okay.
Did you hear my vote?
We did. Thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Craig.
So
Just one point of clarification, what would you like that report that Rachel wants of all the employees that are coming through grants? On the next poll, we'll give it to you.
yeah, that'd be great.
And when are we gonna get the report from John? Do we need to set a date for that?
I think we do it at the same time frame.
Okay, at the same time.
So in 2 weeks?
Yep.
Are you okay with 2 weeks? Is that too soon?
Yes.
Okay.
You'll get it.
And Councillor Whipple has added her vote as well. So that passes 6-0.
Yes.
All right, we'll move to the next item then, which is the discussion. Yes.
Real quick question. So is that a request for the administration to come back to the work meeting for that? Or is this just pass along via email and out to the council?
Yeah, I think we just need to come back to us.
So-
We've done our bit.
Yep.
Just to email.
Well, my one question would be, if John comes back with something favorable, we probably want to add to the motion of creating some kind of fund for land use. So, I don't know, I think I prefer to have John come to a work meeting so that we can make a motion in that rather than just getting an
Okay.
email. But as far as the mayor goes, I think that's just good information to have.
Okay, so that could
What do
be
you-
part of your next.
Is that your, that was your,
Presentation. Okay. Thank you. All right. The next item is our discussion related to an ordinance amending water fees on the Provo City Consolidated Fee Schedule. We're going to start with Gordon Haight.
All right, thank you.
Gordon, did you accept their opportunity to be on the radio this morning?
I did. So
How did that go? You loved every minute of it?
I love every minute of it. Yeah, we have people that are much more clever and it would sound better that should be on the radio than me, but anyway, it was great. No, I appreciate being able to be here, and there's been a lot of discussion about the water rates and what we're doing tonight. And so I kind of just wanted to outline what we're doing and just kind of make the position clear so everybody can kind of think through this really well. So tonight, there's two separate things we're looking at. One is tiered rates, and that doesn't have to have anything to do with the increase. That is revenue neutral. It just has to do with how we bill customers. And the advantage that we tried to point out with that is that it provides a little more equity, because not every gallon of water costs the same. And in the summer, water costs more than it does in the winter. And so when we go into peak demand, that water is far more expensive than the summer. And so doing a tier allows some equity. We don't have to change it. We can continue as we're doing today, or we can adjust it. So it's not a mandate. I know that most communities, if not all the communities in the state, have tiered. I hear that all have had it but us, but I got to believe out of 217 communities or whatever there are, there's probably some out there that don't. But the ones I'm familiar with all have tiered for this reason. There's a discussion around tiered about conservation. It allows people often to look at their bill a little more critically and how their water use. So that is a side effect, but it isn't the primary reason that we do this. It's mostly for the equity and providing for more uniform price across the board. The second thing we're going to talk about tonight is a rate. And there's been a lot of discussion on the rate. And so I want to start off by just saying we adopted a master plan that I believe is correct. It tells us the things we need to do in the city to make us function and to accomplish all the things we need to. And then it's up to us to figure out a mechanism to pay for it. And there are a lot of different things that we can consider to make that happen. And so last year, one of the things I had mentioned to you is that we can look at some other options to pay for the improvements other than a water rate. And this may be a time that it would be worthwhile to pause to look at some of these other options. And that'd be the recommendation I would give you, is let's try some things. We're going to talk about some things later today, but it may be an option to give us a chance to look at other things other than just a water rate. So tonight you can vote on one or both of these things, but at the end of the day, it's the council's decision what a rate is or what it should be, or if we tier it. They have pros and cons. When we do the tiering, some people are going to experience a fairly significant increase because of their water use through summer. And those things get compounded when you look at the rate. So what I wanted to do today is one of the things that needed to happen was we are showing how the tiering works with our water rate. And so Keith is going to go through the tiering that you didn't see last week, the tables, how that works, and answer any questions associated with either the rate or the tier or any of those things you may have. And I'll answer your questions. So yes.
Just in preparation for this, can I ask an overarching question? In my head, I for some reason I thought that we hadn't raised water rates in a long time, but I got your list of where we have raised them. So I don't recall voting on those raises. So is there a certain percentage you can just raise without a vote, or how does that work?
I think, no, you have to vote on everything we do, whether, I'm not as familiar with those earlier raises, but.
Well, like last year, the 5%, like. Maybe we
So in
just did that for us.
2004, we didn't put in
There's been a couple times before where we've done the thing where we passed several rates, several increases all at the same time.
Like with the storm water, like the
Right, like
wastewater
we
and
passed
stuff
a
too.
table where it was gonna
Okay.
go up every year, but it was one vote.
Oh, okay, okay, so that was my second part of my question. So I thought that we couldn't vote for like a 10-year plan without it going to the council every year, but.
No,
but that's-
you can put it into the code. It's just that that a future council could change it at any point if they
Okay,
wanted.
so those could have been put in earlier and, okay, all right, that answers my question, thank you.
John, did you have a comment you wanted to?
I don't know if this answers your question, but what we typically done over the years is that part of the budget process. And so those rate increases we look at that were done previously were submitted as part of the budget process, and the council approved those rate increases when the budget was adopted. So,
So to be clear, Gordon, if the council voted to support the tiered structure, but not a rate increase, the tiered structure would apply to the current rates. Okay.
And there'd be no new revenue in the system. It'd be neutral
Right.
in terms of that. I mean, the city got, yes. Yeah, that's correct. And so tonight you can you could just approve the tier or the
Okay.
rate or both, however you want to.
Councilor Baldwin.
So if we just approve the tiers, the 3 tiers, how does that look? Because right now we're just on a winter and a summer. And so I would be curious on what those levels would be and what that impact would be before I could vote on that. I'd have to see it.
So the tier system can be a lot of different ways. And so we had Keith and his group look at what we think would be the best locations to put the first
Right.
tier and the second tier, you know, all 3 of the tiers.
Which we've seen.
And the base rate. And so that could be adjusted, but he can explain the methodology and why he picked those rates. And a lot of it had to do with trying to capture only the top 10% heaviest users. And it was meant to try to, again, look at equity. And there's multiple ways we can do this. So if there's certain objectives, they're intended by the council, we can create a tier that will accomplish that. I don't know if that answers your question.
How do you say changing to tiers though would be revenue neutral?
The city wouldn't get any additional funds. The city, so when John looks, so if we just adopted the tier system under the current rate, John would look at the water budget and see that it hadn't gone up 1 penny. It would be the same because the way customer service would arrange the tiers is that people would actually have a decrease in costs, other people would have an increase, and the city would receive the same amount of money.
I think that's probably, we do that.
That would be moving a tiered structure without a rate increase.
That's if you adopt it without a tier. So
Without a rating.
without a rate, is that the city would have no new funding. It would stay just as it is today. This year's would be the same amount of funding we'd get next year. It's just that certain individuals that had the increase, they went over the tiers that have an increased cost, and those that were below that would have a lower cost.
And I can actually tell you what those rates would be. They're not very hard. You would just take the recommended tiers for 2025 and you would divide them by 1.12. It's just removing the 12% increase. So there's nothing magic about that. We found the right ratio and then we increased it with the rate increase by that 12%.
And see, I wouldn't feel comfortable on voting like something like that before we got it out to the public and let them vet it. Yeah.
So the thought would be is let's have Keith show you this, go through the tiering, his comments, and then we'll answer any questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, Gordon.
Yeah, and really, again, the presentation that's in your packet is exactly the same as we looked at before. There was one thing that I actually probably should have fixed from last time before, which was just the confusion on that table about winter, summer versus tiers. We get to do this again. Hopefully I'll fix that one next time.
That confused me when I was doing calculations before we got our calculator. That's where my confusion went.
And hopefully the calculator has been helpful for answering some questions. Let's see, do I have control of this? Okay. You do. Oh, there we go. Okay. We've talked about all this. This is where I should have made this a little clearer. I apologize for that. Okay, this is what you have not seen. So there was a question that came up, which was how do we've tried to keep this simple. And so everything we've shown you thus far has been for residential rates for your 3/4 inch water meters. That applies to nearly 80% of your residential connections. That's 77% or something right in that range. So the question became okay, how do we apply this to other situations other than those 3/4 inch residential meters? So the first thing I want to talk about is residential. So there are some concerns, specifically, one of them was about lot size. What do you do when somebody has a larger lot size than another person? They can't conserve as much, they have to maintain that grass space, etc. So there's a couple of things that we can do. One is that we could structure these tiers based on actual lot size. And you could create bins of lot size that identify different tiers. The other more common way to do it, because it is much easier to implement and also provides some equity, is to group people by their meter size. And the reason that this works pretty well is because normally the larger the lot you have, the larger your meter. And that also applies to multifamily type connections. So when we have an apartment with 100 units, they will have a larger meter size. So what we did was we went and we looked at the data of your historic water use, and we looked by residential meter size, and then we identified percentages so that by meter size, you would be paying the same amount on a percentage basis in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So for example, in 3/4 inch, about 10% are larger than 55,000 gallons. On a 1 inch, about 10% are above 100. 1.5 inch, about 10% are above 250,000 gallons, and so on and so forth. Does that kind of make sense how those were created? So this is created so that the cost burden is divided fairly amongst these various meter sizes. Now, there is some fluctuation within each meter size. There are very small 3/4 inch lots, and there are larger 3/4 inch lots. Grouping them together is a necessary simplification to make a water rate administrable. Is that a word?
Sure.
To be able to administer it. And so could there be additional breakdowns here? Sure there could. This though is the most common and maintains a reasonable level of fairness between the different meter sizes. Okay.
So do we currently have that residential tier volume break going on?
No, you don't, because you have just a seasonal rate and you're not going by size. It's just that winter, summer. You do have base rates that are based on meter size. So your base rates do vary by meter size, but this does not exist today.
So you said that's pretty common. You do several cities, not just Provo. Is this generally where their tiers break out is 10, 55, or 15, 100?
Are those specific levels of
specific
use?
levels, yeah, that like maybe Sandy would have if you did Sandy, or would Sandy look a little bit different with their?
Every city is a little bit different because every city has a little bit different water use patterns, and every city has slightly different goals. I will tell you, most cities that have incorporated increasing block rates actually have 4 blocks, or 4 tiers, not 3. The kind of ideal recommendation is somewhere between 3 to 5, 3 to 6, maybe. Beyond that, it gets too complicated. Less than that, it's hard to make any kind of differentiation. So I would guess that probably 80% have 4 tiers, 10% have more than 4, and 10% have less than 4.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just show the other thing. You'll note that the tier costs are the same regardless of what the meter size is. And again, that's trying to capture cost of service and the amplification associated with peak demands. Yeah.
Because there seems to be a lot of sort of lack of clarity on why the tier system is more equitable, or if it's more equitable. Can you either explain now and tonight as to why what we currently have is not as equitable? If that's your argument, can you explain that? Meaning, you know, because the average person, and myself included, you first think about it, you think, well, a gallon is a gallon, so why should a gallon cost more? Why should you have differentiations at all in terms of gallon? But so that cost right there, can you just explain why that cost is higher for the higher tier?
Sure. So what we're looking at is demand on the system. And demand does not hit the system equally throughout the year. So specifically, if we had a system that was designed to deliver water constantly, we would be delivering, somebody help me, about 15 million gallons a day or something like that? 10 million? Okay. We'd be delivering 10 million gallons a day. However, because of the way that we use water, in the summertime, we don't use that 10 million, we use 50 million gallons a day during the summertime. So what that means is that we have to put in a lot more infrastructure to meet those peak demands that occur. So specifically, we have to make our pipes bigger because we need to get the water through faster during that time period. We need to build additional storage because we're seeing larger fluctuations throughout the day that storage needs to fill and drain. And we also use more expensive water sources during that period. If we could just use, you know, at a flat rate, we just use our most cost-effective water sources, but we can't do that in the summer. We have to bring them all online, and we spend a lot of money on power for wells and other things. So all of those result in additional cost for the city. So behind these numbers, we have done an analysis of what it costs to serve water at basically a constant rate and what it costs to serve water at these higher peaking rates. And so that's what's embedded into those higher tiers, is capturing the actual cost of providing that additional service. That's in a nutshell. We could go into it further, but follow-up questions or additional thoughts?
Well, I guess without the tiers, then you have a situation where the lower users, as you had explained it to me, just want to make sure I understand it correctly, that the lower users are, without the tiers, the lower users end up subsidizing the cost of the system that is incurred by the higher users.
Correct.
Okay. So, and we've been doing that. I mean, we have the 2-tier system right now, but I don't even understand how our system as a winter summer tier system, it meets the requirements of the state law, because it doesn't seem like it does what the state law is intended to do.
You do have a small increase at 100,000 gallons on both your winter and summer rate. There's a little small increase. So it does meet the letter of the law. I will note that the legislature right now is working on legislation to strengthen the language associated with tiered rates. So I don't know what will happen with that language, but right now you meet the letter of the law, but certainly not the spirit of the law as intended to capture tiered rates.
This tier right here would satisfy the legislature for whatever they're coming up with this session.
It's hard to know without knowing what's going to come out of the legislature, but this definitely meets the current statute and the intent of the current statute.
So if we have to revisit this again, are we putting the cart before the horse?
We have to revisit again, do we what?
If the legislature revamps how they're doing this tier system and we adopt it now, and we're gonna have to adopt something completely different in 2 months from now, are we putting the cart before the horse even adopting?
I wouldn't guess so. My guess is that this is going to be just fine. But that is a possibility. Assuming the legislation passes.
I mean, again, without knowing that, it's hard to opine without knowing the details. So it's a good question. More likely scenario is that if you reject this now and the bill passes, in a couple months we'll be back saying you have to do it. But I don't think there's a lot of risk that if you do this, then you're gonna have to do something different. But you don't know without knowing it.
Meaning this is the general direction stated.
Yeah, and I will add what the state seems to be primarily targeting is implementing these type rates for secondary water systems who have traditionally not all of them have had this type of system. And if that's the case, the current was just up at the legislature on Monday. The current proposal is implementation by 2027. So it's not an immediate thing. But that was focused primarily on secondary.
My comment is this has been such a hard debate.
Yes.
That if we have to come back and bring something stricter to the public, I would much rather just put it off and wait until something stricter happens. But if this is going to satisfy that requirement, then you know what I mean?
Well, so if I am a betting man, which I'm not really, but if I were, I do think that what the legislature is doing would affect this at all. I think there's a less than 1% chance that this is affected. If we were talking secondary, that's a much different thing, but I don't want to over push that issue. I just want to make sure we were clear on compliance. Okay, I'm just going to mention the other thing here, which let's see. Okay, we do the same thing for non-residential. And your non-residential includes your institutional, your industrial, and your commercial type accounts. This is the exact same system. It's using the exact same meter sizes, but you will notice a difference in the allowance. And you might at first glance say, wait, how is that fair? There's a different allowance. But again, this is based on a statistical analysis to be able to capture the effect of peaking that occurred by each of these different user types. And so in general, commercial users tend to use a larger portion of their actual meter capacity. And so that is reflected in these numbers here. But it's still basically the exact same concept on the non-residential side.
So non-residential doesn't have a 3/4 connection, or it's included in the one.
Yeah, correct. So we have set a minimum size of 1 inch and below on commercial for that reason. Okay, these are really the only two pieces of information that I have developed since we last spoke. And Yeah, it did involve a fair amount of just statistical analysis using the tiers that we had set up. If we wanted to make changes, it is possible to change, but that's why we made the decision before, was to try to hone in on this.
So the rates per 1,000 gallons are the same. for
Exact
non-residential?
same on commercial and, or
It's
excuse
only
me,
the base rate.
non-residential, residential.
That's different.
Yeah, just the rate per tier, it's just the tier breakpoints are slightly different.
So I just want to bring this up because there's been some discussion about getting rid of tier 3, and I brought this up in the public works meeting that we had. So if we got rid of tier 3 completely, what does that do to tier 2? How much does that bring up the price? I'm looking at the tier volume costs.
So we did a little analysis of what that would require, and Jimmy can tell me the numbers, but I believe the $1.46 in tier 1 would have to go up to $1.61, 64, and then tier 2 would split the difference here. So you have that number? $3.14. $3.14. And because of that, we would also have to move the tier break. And so we would charge tier 1. Let's go back to residential. Instead of being a 10, it would divide at 25,000 gallons. So you'd have $1.64 below 25,000 and sorry, now I've forgotten it. 314 above 25,000. So that would actually be more expensive for nearly all your residents. It would be less expensive for your largest water users. So basically those 10% that are in the tier 3, they would see a drop in their bill if you were to go to 2, because you're basically shifting more of that cost to the smaller.
So basically everyone else would be paying for the higher.
That's right.
The
Yeah,
higher tier users.
that's right.
Do we know what percentage of users we have at tier 2?
In tier 3?
Into tier 2?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll just confess. Most of your users are going to get into tier 2 at some point. Because most of them have some outdoor use.
Okay. So like during the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I'm tier 1 for what, like 4-5 months of the year, and the other months I'm in tier 2 because there's more watering. Yeah.
There's plenty of people that are tier 1 to tier 2 all the time.
Councillor Henry.
Have you done any, there has been some talk about the concern about the rates as they're suggested, the rollout of them over the course of the next few years. And I keep wanting to know what the cost would be if we adjusted any of those rates. I think I asked you this question earlier, but like if we said, well, the 12% jump in that first year is a lot to ask people to do in 1 year. So I mean, I'm curious to know if you've done any analyses of what the recommended rate increase, if you were to adjust those recommended rate increases to be lower or extended out over longer periods of time, what that does. I mean, I think I asked you this question, so I know more or less what you were going to say, but I think it would be helpful for the public to hear that explanation, because it's going to be, if this is going to be what we're asking our citizens to do, it's important that they understand why this is what financial sense this makes, as opposed to something that could be offered as an alternative. So
Sure.
Have you run any of those numbers to get a sense of the anticipated cost?
Yes. So I will continue to advocate for the importance of getting your funding level up to this sustainable level over time. That to me is essential. If you are not at that level in the long run, then your system will be slowly falling apart, and you will be in trouble. So that's my strong recommendation to you. So the question then becomes is, well, do we have to get there over 10 years? You know, could we go just a little flatter over time? How could we do that? So any changes to this schedule is basically going to shave into this pink up at the top or salmon color, which is your rehabilitation and replacement. So we talked about this probably a year ago, but I'm going to reemphasize it. There is a difference between proactive replacement and reactive replacement. When we're proactive, we can schedule when to do the construction. We can get lowest cost bids. We can coordinate with our residents to make it easier for them. When we do reactive, we often are in an emergency mode and we have to just do whatever it takes to get water back in service. So our analysis of the cost of reactive versus proactive on a number of national databases is that it costs about 60% more to do reactive maintenance versus proactive maintenance. So what does that mean? That means for every dollar we shave off of the pink now, unless we can catch up at some point, we are going to have to pay $1.60 to do that same work later. So you have to make tough decisions. I don't envy your position because these are hard questions to answer. But I would emphasize that you don't get to choose whether you're going to spend the money. The system will require you to spend the money. You get to choose whether you spend $1 now or you spend $1.60 at some point in the future. And so that's where I would continue to advocate for making that transition as fast as can sustainably be done to help your residents have lower costs in the long run.
I just want to add something.
Yeah.
The one that we had last year horrifies me, where the road was crumbling as the car was driving, right? I never want to see a child riding a bicycle falling into a trench into one of our roads, or a car, heaven forbid, like what happened. And it'd be worse that someone gets hurt or maimed or dead. That would, I think we get a lot more pushback on something like that. So that kind of thing horrifies me, and it's something we're already seeing now.
Yeah. I don't want to be a doomsayer here, but if we continue to fund the system below where it needs to be, we will have more of that over time.
Yeah, for my office, there was a water break, I think associated with the temple maybe. So there were two or 3 days last year that we didn't have water in our building. And then another one just a couple of weeks ago when they were coming back and finishing it up. It's incredibly disruptive to have a day where you get in the office and you're like, oh, we have no toilets today. Let's see how well we work at, you know, go to Zupas to have to go to the restroom, right? It's incredibly disruptive. I'm looking at this like by analogy to my own house. So I have a super old house, very old pipes. And more than a dozen years ago, we got told by our plumber that we would need to replace our sewer line going out because of structural issues and age issues, and it would be several tens of thousands of dollars to do this. And we're like, oh, we cannot do that right now. That is too much for our budget. He's like, well, you can wait, but you can't wait forever. And so we waited, and then we got to the point where we would have to have the plumber come and like snake it every year so that we could keep having water flowing out. And then we had to like have him come twice a year. And last year we had to have him come 3 times, and he's like, you cannot keep doing this. It is time. And all of that money that we spent over these years snaking, like we were buying time, but we were not fixing the underlying problem. We were not fixing the pipes so that we had sustainable pipes going into the future. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at here, right? Like we can continue to do the patches, but the patches are gonna get more expensive. If we don't actually pay to do this planned rehabilitation of the system, we're going to have more disruptive service. We're going to be paying more for that disruptive service. And we're not ever going to get to the point where we're in that happy blue zone.
Councilor Hanley.
Yeah, just another local example in my street. We had one of the worst pavement problems on our street in the city for a long time. I was always hoping someday it would get repaved, and it finally was, and then a water main broke and they had to rip it up 3 times to fix it. You might remember this. and the street is now sort of wobbly. I mean, it's gotten this weird warp in it all the way down the hill, and I don't know, I just think about how much money we spent to get it repaved, and then we had to dig it up several times. So and it's now well on its way to needing to be repaved someday because of that. So I do think that $1.60 feels very real to me in terms of what I've experienced on my own street.
Right.
I was just gonna add for, for completion of the picture too, that $1.60 is about the cost of fixing the pipe. But usually when pipes break, they do other things than just break the pipe. They flood basements, they collapse roads so that you have traffic accidents, things like that. Our standard on those kinds of things is that if there's a system failure that causes damage to somebody else's property, and we didn't know that it was coming, and we had no reason to know it was coming, then we deny the claim. But if we did know that the failure was imminent or had reason to know that it was imminent, then we end up paying the claim. So there's legal liability for the damage arising out of system failures as well.
You mean this map that we had that shows all of the pipes that are more than 50 or 100 years old?
I wasn't going to point that out to the public, but sure. Yes. So, I mean, that's the thing, is the studies we do to evaluate the status of our system, those are evidence of what we know.
Well, if there are no additional questions for Keith, maybe we could have Gordon. It sounds like you had more to present, Gordon, that you wanted to share with us as part of this discussion.
Oh, bad.
Relative to the, was that just for tonight?
So I think Keith's right, and I think the questions that have been brought up are very important. That I'm not advocating the idea of not replace these pipes. I think the plan, the idea is, I think the recommendation I'm making is that there's other funding sources we have not been able to develop at this point, and we are processing through some things that might impact the amount that we need to have or when we need to do this. So that's the only reason I bring that up. So the pipes still need to be replaced. They need to get better just because I said so, but there's a timing that we're looking at to get a number together.
I've had citizens advocate for revenue bonds or a bonding mechanism instead to get our infrastructure where it needs to be, because their whole thing is, you keep upping these rates, they never go back down. What's your opinion on that?
I'm not a big advocate for bonding for maintenance. I don't mind bonding for a capital project for new infrastructure, but it seems to me that you'd want to do it with a regular income, so it's more part of your.
The idea it is perpetual, so you might.
Yeah, I would say that's how I would recommend, and I don't believe anybody's looking at any kind of bonding at this point. I don't think that would be something we would do. That'd be something I wouldn't recommend.
So Gordon, are there any, I know the grant money is a threat at this point, but is there any other funding sources that we can get to do this besides the residents? I know that was one of the administration's big thing, is try to seek other funding besides resident money. Is there any other way to do it?
We're looking for another COVID outbreak in Washington.
Yeah.
Too soon, Gordon, too soon.
Yeah.
First move, Gordon.
When's the statute for the
Just
taking
right
back
now.
job?
PTSD for all of it.
Okay, sorry. I think the city has some resources that we need to consider and look at. I suspect I'm not. If there are state or federal resources that open up for replacement of pipe, I think we'll be aggressive at it. I think there's reasons the state is maybe charging down a bad path. They're spending money. I'm familiar again with Salt Lake City, and in Holiday, they were doing 50% of their water was leaking. They were paying for the water, just leaking through pipes. And the issue is, if you really want to conserve water in the state, and 50% of your water is going to the groundwater, and you're spending so many dollars going in a certain direction, there are reasons the state ought to be rethinking how they are allocating. And we're talking about already green or already a clean water that's, drinkable. And this is happening up and down the Wasatch Front. So there are whole other ways to address this than what I see government agencies thinking about, that probably ought to be in the midst of what they're doing. So I'm not counting on federal or state grants. I think our smartest people end up just getting stuck in city councils and mayors who don't go on, graduate onto state legislator and federal legislator. Maybe that's wrong. That was probably meant to be a compliment, but it turned out wrong. But there's a practicality, and there are some things we'll be talking about later, and maybe have some bearing on what we're talking about here.
And the other
this
thing,
afternoon.
and I don't mean any criticism or anything to the administration. It's just been thrown out there several times. And I do realize, going over your budget, you guys are very frugal and you guys are pinching pennies. But it always comes back to us as council members. And so I just kind of want this in a public meeting. Why can't you cut something else? Why can't we use general fund dollars to pay for this? And like I said, I don't mean it to be critical. But can you guys address that about efficiencies and?
Sure, all options are on the table. I think what we've been able to do is set up a capital improvement program within water rates that also covers a lot of the capital needs of our system. I think looking at alternate revenues, when we look at this plan, this is based only on rates. And I think if you were just talking the water department because as water revenues come in, first dollars out are our operation budget for water. So can you look at that and try to create capital from efficiency and savings in that? Or do you look at other possible water revenues that could come into be in play, whether it's leasing water rights as a possible revenue to fund capital and do these things? I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do. Now, definitely you can go to the general fund. We have a utility rate that has created a capital account, and you'll probably be going over their capital improvement program really soon here, to go over what is spent in that capital. We just approved debt for water treatment plant out of that same capital fund. So there are resources there. So there's a lot of different things, Councilmember Bogdan, that we can look at. And, from our standpoint, I think we support our public works director in saying there's just some things that we think we can try to get to these answers, and going to the citizens is something that I think administration feels that we should be compelled to do after looking at all these options.
Okay, so basically, if I summarize it, that's something that you guys are doing right now. So before these recommendations, or that's something that you're committed to do?
Well, I think it's something we will always do, so it is an analysis that we are going on, but we do understand that setting rates is a council function, and So obviously, whatever happens as part of the decision made today would dictate some of our actions and what we do.
Thank you.
Councilor Henry.
Councilor Bogdan's question makes me think about I mean, we've had this discussion on and off for a while, you know, about making sure we're paying for what we're actually getting. And I think one of the hesitancies that I have about placing the burden of these costs anywhere else but on the rates is that we're talking about water use. And it seems to me that a system that keeps evading the actual cost that consumers are putting on the system in the long term is not a healthy structure, right? Because then you have sort of you separated cost from use and created an illusion that the water that you're getting isn't costing a certain amount of money to the city. So that's one of my responses to that question that I've had, is to say, well, we're trying to figure out what the most accurate and fair way to price the actual cost of the actual use. And I was impressed that the Utah Taxpayers Association and a lot of the conservative think tanks in Utah really feel very strongly about making sure that water rates reflect use and not just because that might help with water conservation, but because a more equitably distributed cost of water use actually, when it drives down water consumption, that helps the taxpayer in the long term. And you know, anyway, that just seems like a fundamental concept in a lot of conservative economic thinking, is that you always want the price to reflect the use and not have it attached to something else. So that's anyway.
I think that's a good point. It is a commodity. It's something that the residents are purchasing from the city.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a tax. And I think that's where a lot of people get the confusion, is that it's commodity, just like the former Questar, you would buy your gas from there, or a commodity, like if you're gonna put gasoline in your car. It's a commodity that everybody needs to survive. And I think that was helpful for me when Public Works pointed out that that first tier is what they call essential water, which is water that you need to survive. And that is what you could say is subsidized, because it's the lowest rate that we are offering versus the tier 2, which is what the normal person uses to water their outside, whether that's a garden, whether that's a lawn, whether that's flowers, whether that's your kids running through the sprinklers, whatever that is. And then the higher tier is the anomaly.
Yeah, because if all of our use all year were in that tier 1, the whole system would be much less expensive. Right? The cost of water would be less, and we could all just be paying that lower rate. But because our use in the summer is 5 times what it is in the winter, we've got to be able to pay for a system that's 5 times as big as what our winter use is. George brought in other groups, so I did get a message from Lee Sands with Libertas, and he says that first, they support making cuts to non-essential services to prevent a rate increase, but if non-essential services cannot be cut, we support a tiered user fee for water usage, and that they would oppose creating a utility fee or increasing property taxes for such a thing. And it really goes back to what George is saying, is that we are actually paying for the commodity, for the thing that we're using.
Now, to be clear, and as a reminder, Gordon, the current water revenue provides for $9 million per year in maintenance. So am I remembering that?
Capital. So part of that's going for,
Capital.
yeah, some of it's going for replacements of pipes, and some we're preparing some of the other areas, like
New developments.
yeah. And so we gave quite a bit of money to UDOT to replace all the pipes in Third South. Those were old red pipes, but we had used that to replace those. So we're using that at capital. There's about $9 million for capital replacement. So we're trying to do that, use as much of that in replacement as we can.
Mm-hmm.
So all these have been excellent questions, and I guess the thought is tonight, the intent is to have Keith go through the presentation, because a lot of the public hasn't seen this, answer any of the questions you have. And so today, right now, we have time to go through anything else to make sure we're clear on what we're getting out, or what message needs to be, or what information you think would be valuable.
Well, I appreciate Keith's willingness tonight to present. That really can be part of our public information effort, because I think that's mostly what we've been hearing over the last 2 weeks, including as we speak, while emails continue to come in. We didn't know, we didn't hear, educate us more. I think that's the big frustration that residents have. And so in that vacuum, media has stepped forward and is supposedly providing the information to the residents.
Yes, information is challenging.
And that, I was going to ask about that. It sounds to me like you'd like me to take a healthy amount of time this evening to walk through, provide the background. It will be a little bit tough to summarize everything we've done over the last 2 years.
Sure.
But we'll spend a little bit of time.
Well, and also the business district, they've asked, because, you know, this is new information, those business rates, right? They've also asked that they have some time to study that. Is that something, Barry, that you're willing to come up with a calculator for? If you're willing.
I can do that, I think, tomorrow.
I don't think Quinn is really. I think he'd probably appreciate it. I haven't asked him if that's what he'd want, but I think he'd appreciate it. And I think if he's going to businesses, we might be getting more questions. So that might be helpful. If you're willing.
You just like the residential.
The business rates. Because I know that's one thing he wanted to do, and that wasn't my suggestion. He said, Becky, I want to go to these businesses and see how it impacts them so that we can come back with some feedback to the council, which I think is fair. If we're gonna even consider something this steep and this quick, you know, that people really be informed and really have those questions answered. Thank you.
Other questions for Keith or Gordon or Barry? Yes, Craig, go ahead.
One of the things I'd like to suggest is I'm afraid that tonight's meeting will be woefully inadequate in terms of educating people. Without education, this just seems like a meaningless tax hike, and we're just part of the bad government that's mismanaged, and so we're sticking it to the taxpayers. When you're immersed in the reality of and the information of what's going on and the needs and the priority of those needs, it's a very different situation. And tonight, a very small portion of the city is going to be paying attention. All they're hearing is the blast about, you know, prices are going up and they're on a fixed income. They're missing the realities that we're dealing with in this meeting. And tonight's meeting will not be adequate to educate them. I would love to hear what the administration is thinking about in terms of educating the public so that we all kind of take this journey together. Otherwise, this just seems like a big tax hike. You know, to Becky's point, it's not a tax. That hike represented we're smart about it, or we're foolish and pay much more on the back end. And that must be some sort of education to the city. And tonight is not. It's a good start. And it's unfortunately very inadequate in terms of the education that needs to go on. I'm just curious if the administration is planning on something to help get this information out.
Since Isaac Paxman hadn't been, that's a new thought for me, but certainly willing to have that conversation. Yeah, I haven't been familiar where we've even, so I think it's a very fair suggestion and one we were happy to work with you on.
Well, in my mind, Isaac, these need to go hand in hand. I don't feel comfortable taking big steps tonight without my neighbors having good information, because right now all they're getting is emotion and hyperbole, and people are not immersed in the realities. And if they were, I think they would engage differently. Now, we could argue all day long, should that hike be 3% or 30%? Or the 12 that's offered, but people aren't even on the same page in terms of why can't Provo be more proactive? Why can't Provo? They don't have the benefit of everything we've gone through, and I don't feel comfortable moving forward without them being a part of this process beyond just what's happening in the media and the emotion surrounding this.
Thank you, Craig. Well said. And I view this evening's meeting also as really just a start of that public information process, where we have professionals here who can speak intelligently to it. And although not a huge audience, a very focused audience, an audience who is tuned into this issue and is interested. Okay.
I think that's important because we've had a few people or a few outlets really doing a very fear-mongering kind of scare tactic around this proposed rate that doesn't create a nuanced conversation. It doesn't give real understanding to our residents of what we're doing. And so there needs to be an equally aggressive counter to that, so that people have good information, so they can understand why this is necessary. And it needs to be more than just us talking in these public meetings, because as we know, relatively few people watch our public meetings that we have here, but more people will share reels that are shared on Facebook, and those short snippets reach more. And so we'll have more work to do on this.
Councillor McKay.
And the hard thing is that we're saying we're doing a 12% increase of revenue. But I've done the calculator for multiple homes and not one has been below 15%. Some are increased 24%, some are increased 44%, some are increased 61, some are increased 100, some are increased 98, some are increased 54. These are huge increases, like astronomical. And they have not just had no increases the last few years. I got that information I sent to you, but we've had increases every year. And their eggs are increased, and Timpview School sucks, and property taxes are enormous, and the school board's doing a bond, and I mean, like, the list of angst is intense, and people are getting angry. And then you have Elon Musk showing all this, they're like, well, let's do to get him into Provo City. You know, it's like, people's like level of tolerance shot. And so I know you just say that it doesn't matter and that their percentage is nothing and they use it, so they need to pay it. It's exorbitant for a lot of people, exorbitant. And these are people that have been in homes for a long time. It's ancestral land. It's used to have irrigation. Now it doesn't have irrigation. You know, their kids play on their grass. Like, they aren't doing bad things. So I have a lot of concern I haven't done one home that's less than a 15% increase, not one. I calculated a lot of homes.
The hope that I've seen is that many people, at least a lot of people, recognize the need. They understand the need. It's
too high.
Too high, and the process by which we proposed generating those funds.
Joe, well, we've done a lot of meetings. There's no shortage of our meetings. It's been amazing. Like, unfortunately, citizens don't pay attention, and that's not our fault. And they just pay attention when they get some crazy text from someone, making them pay attention. So, you know, that's happened. The crazy texts have happened. So it's on their radar. So now it will take them time to catch up. I mean, I put this in my newsletter multiple times and everyone just was supportive. But it takes like suddenly calculating things and hearing numbers and they're like, whoa, it's like all hell broke loose. So it is, yeah, it's gonna take some time.
All right. If there's no other comment, we're on schedule for another brief break. Thank you, Gordon, and thank you, Steve.
How long is the break, Gary?
10 minutes.
Thank you.
Well, Travis, sorry you missed the.
I know, I missed the fun.
The heart of the. I was.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right, well, we will reconvene our council work session here with the next presentation, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code Title 14 regarding multifamily amenities with citywide application. That will be presented by Hannah Saltz, who is one of our planners. Saltz. Yes.
Salzel. It's a weird one. All right. This is a lot to discuss in 30 minutes. I will try to get through staff's explanation as well as the feedback we got from Planning Commission and get as much discussion and input as we can this time with whatever time we have left. If we need to continue this and the council needs more time before it goes to the evening meeting tonight, that's entirely fine. The Planning Commission needed a fair bit of time with it. So just know going in, the timeline is whatever you want it to be. This is following up on the EV discussion that the council had a while ago, about a year ago, of how to make EV charging more common in multifamily developments. Staff had this solution to encourage this and other city priorities with a score amenities review that was not quite as hands-off as leaving it to the full market, but not quite as hands-on as fully mandating it. We spent a lot of time interviewing developers, looking at what other cities are doing, putting together some numbers, tweaking the numbers till we felt like the scores were where they wanted them to be, and working through that with Planning Commission as well. We also did a full survey of all of the multifamily developments in Provo in the last 10, 15 years, seeing how they would rank up and what amenities they were putting in. Just to make sure this wasn't going to be something too onerous for developers, but that also hopefully it was communicating the priorities we wanted to communicate. Quickly, what it does and what it doesn't do, because there's been some concern about that. It does create a list with the scores. It clarifies existing requirements for amenity space. Already, each zone has to have a certain percentage of square footage for the property or the building dedicated to amenities. Not getting rid of that. We're proposing changing it for 2 zones, but those are just tweaks. As we've noticed, it's a little low. So they have to meet the score requirement, and they also have to meet the square footage requirement. The score just helps guide them on how to fill the square footage requirement. Both are staying. We're not getting rid of those. It communicates city priorities for amenities. It allows developers to choose their amenities. They can choose anything off the menu as long as it hits the minimum score. We're not going to tell them they have to put in a certain amenity for their tenants. It also allows substitutions, so if something's not on the list, the director can allow a substitution and adjust the score accordingly. Staff will also keep an eye on the list if there are ways people are abusing loopholes they've found, or if we're finding that there are really common trending amenities that we didn't foresee right now, we will in the future update that list. The list can adapt and be flexible. It does not create a full green development package. It does not require EV spaces. There was a lot of debate on whether or not the city should do that. This leaves it for developers, but communicates that it's a high priority for the city, and we reward it. These are the 2. I don't know that this light really works on the screen at all. Well, for the light, the LEDs absorb it. That's for the neighborhood mixed use in the downtown zone. We just found that the triggering number of units was a little low. We propose increasing the triggering number of units. That means that any project with fewer than this triggering number of units does not have to meet the square footage requirement. Here are the proposed scores. I will come back to this. This is where we're going to spend most of our time. I just want to point out that the top 2 most highly valued scores are EV charging stations and infrastructure for EV readiness, as well as the tech spaces. Don't worry about this list. It's in your packet. I'll have this on screen during our discussion time. From our analysis of recent developments, we found that most developments, not all, but most, were doing really well at offering good variety without this policy. Scores on our hypothetical table that we come up with ranged from 48, which would not pass, to 163. There's the full list of scores you can see. Large developments, size and development type alone didn't seem to be factors, but overlapped, pictured as a dual axis grid. We did see some correlation. Large developments either went more luxury or more budget, think like student housing apartments, but both did very well at meeting the needs of their tenants. Even the budget large developments had a lot of indoor gathering space, the sort of things that are going to be used by students, but they weren't necessarily expensive items like pools that are going to increase cost for students. It was hangout lounges, indoor gathering spaces, things like that, which is repetitive but appropriate for the demographic. Two of the largest developments also had the highest scores, but their, again, quality levels varied there. Small developments could do it well. Not all did. Some of our highest scorers were really small developments, and also our lowest scorers were smaller developments. They were on both sides of the spectrum. Townhomes specifically were our lowest and highest. It really seemed to depend on whether or not they were going to be budget townhomes, where they really just had like one green open space and maybe a small playground, which would not meet our 60 points, or if they were more luxurious townhomes with a variety of amenities, pools, things like that. We found one low-income housing anomaly that we allowed to use 1/3 of the required floor space for their square footage requirement, but they blew it away with amenities and had a score over 100, even with having less of a square footage requirement. So this can be done at a budget level. This was a mix of small units afforded or intended for different income levels. We also found in one example, this is the only place where a name pops up, that amenities square footage included their leasing office, a hallway, and a bathroom as part of their amenities square footage, but otherwise had an incredible score of, I think, 150-ish. So good argument for increasing diversity and specific use for these amenity square footage spaces without adding a burden. This would close the loophole that you can't count anything as amenity space, but also they met it even without this. So not too onerous. Outdoor gathering spaces we also found very greatly. So you'll notice in the table, we score outdoor amenity spaces kind of based on how they're furnished rather than as one lump. Outdoor amenity spaces are all the same. With some of the higher scores over 100 getting into 150s, 160s, Planning Commission and staff explored increasing the total. Staff had a really robust, good discussion on this. We unanimously recommend keeping the score at 60 points. Planning Commission agreed. The idea is that this policy is meant to set a minimum acceptable standard, not an ideal one. We want to also make sure that we are being really sensitive to costs for low-income tenants and that these projects can be done at a budget level, but are still providing adequate and varied amenities for their tenants. The higher end developments are offering a variety of amenities to attract more clientele who can spend more on their housing. So we're not as worried about those. We also made sure that we often see the minimum amenity that we see is one indoor and one outdoor space that are minimally furnished. This closes the loophole. You couldn't do that and still get 60 points. An EV charging space or pet waste space, other city priorities would be easy ways to improve the score and easily reach more than 60. Getting into the proposed text, I'm not going to read it all. I'll just highlight a little bit as we go since the full text is in your packet. These requirements are already in the zoning code for how amenities work. You can't count setbacks or landscaping you have to have in your park strip as green space. That's not usable for tenants. Multiple instances of the same amenity do count in each instance, like that student building that had multiple indoor gathering spaces for students on each floors. That's appropriate. Each one counts. Talking about the developer or the director being able to make changes and authorize flexibility to the list. This point B, we had some questions about how we would enforce maintenance of amenities. We don't patrol or enforce maintenance of amenities, but if we do find that there's a red flag, it gives us some leverage to be able to press the developer or HOA or whoever is maintaining it to replace the amenities and make sure the quality of life is high for their tenants. The EV parking spaces, there was some debate as to whether or not the space itself and the space for the infrastructure should count as a parking space or as amenity space, since it's technically. We propose that the developer should be able to choose in writing. We'll put it with the rest of their packet for their submittals. And if they do not choose, if they, for any reason, don't choose,
then they will count toward the parking space and not toward amenity minimums, just to make sure that those parking space requirements are met.
That's the opposite of what it says.
Is it? I apologize. Yes, go with the text. They will count toward amenity space and not parking minimums, so that way, regardless of whether the parking space is counted as a EV space is counted as a parking space or not, we'll make sure the amenity spaces are met, or the parking spaces are met. I've been saying these words so much in the last few months. Thank you. They're starting to get mixed. All right, we also note that seating can't count as an outdoor. That's the main list here, is that you can't have 1 table and 5 chairs and count it as 6 amenities, 6 outdoor functions. We don't allow, or would not allow with this, any property owner to charge for the use of these additional expenses, except for EV charging, where they'd be able to charge for the electricity rate.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So in talking to the mill race people, they're talking about, all these fantastic amenities, and I'm like, I would love to go sit in a sauna. And they said that in different developments they've done, they can sell like a pass for somebody who doesn't live there to be able to go and use the amenities. So this code would specifically prohibit doing something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
This was a concern that we heard from developers, that they didn't want, for example, if they put a pet waste space, they didn't want the city letting other people in to use that pet waste space. They wanted it to just be for their tenants, so we put that in code for them. They didn't want to be forced to use their amenities as a business, which was never our intent, but we put this language in there just to make sure that we were clear on that. If that's a point that the council would like to change, you could do that.
I don't know that we need to, but it was interesting that that idea had come up, and then you're like 2 different tracks.
Very much
together.
Yeah.
Well, my comment to that would be, way back in the 50s, they put in those common space parks. There's one over on the west side, and then there's a couple of them up over by Days Market, right? And since then, they've opened up those parks, and I think they even charge for some of those amenities just so they can upkeep on their space. And so, pardon?
Charges at parks like this?
Yeah, there's those private parks, or that they charge them out for like weddings and things like that. There's houses all around them. They're just privately owned. They're like almost like an HOA. They're supposed to take care of them, but a lot of times they don't have the money to do so. And so it's an interesting concept that some of these apartment buildings could actually open some of that out and charge fees in order to help with those homeowner fees, right? Those HOA fees.
Yeah, I wouldn't want them to charge the residents for that. They're already paying for that with their regular fees.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I want to think on that a little bit more, but it's an interesting idea. I also do like the idea that on the previous slide, the maintenance of the amenities, because we've certainly seen different apartments or former hotels that had swimming pools that are no longer being used, and they just are a pit covered with a tarp. Being able to stop that in some way would be really nice.
Yeah.
Having the HOAs kind of maintain their things.
Yeah.
I personally, in my private time, I'm also the president of my HOA, so I did very much write this from an HOA perspective, knowing what that's like. The last piece of information before I turn it over to more open discussion is we did talk with the Utah Valley Home Builders Association and sat down one-on-one with the developer as well to go through the scores and the concept and just make sure that we were on the right track and we weren't going to be stepping on too many toes or adding unintended burdens or costs. They all agreed the concept was very feasible, really not likely to increase costs. There was a bit of a disagreement. Some larger developers thought it was great to know what the city's priorities are. Again, though, looking at the scores, these are the ones who are going to be meeting our scores anyway, but they want to know what the city wants to see so that they can bring projects that the planning commission and council are going to like. So this very clearly communicates that for them with pet space and EVs. Some of the smaller developers didn't want the city telling them what developments to put in or acting like an HOA and monitoring them. We made sure that there's language in here to reassure them that that's not our intent. There were a few that thought EV charging ranked too highly because only a few tenants would use it, but that's kind of up to the market and the project that they're building, how much they put in. The general agreement was that good developers will do this anyway, and the market is trending there. A direct quote. Staff agrees, and we tried to make sure that this development wouldn't be onerous for those who are already producing good products and producing a good high quality of life. But we still find value in the policy for setting a minimum standard for those developers who might try to cut corners, especially on lower cost projects, and also for communicating those priorities like the larger developments that they wanted. The planning commission agreed, but did have some concerns about cost. That was their big thing. They agreed with the communication of standards and policies, priorities, but really didn't want this to increase costs in a market that's already so housing burdened. We as staff don't feel like this necessarily does that. There are many ways that this could be met on a budget by projects that are already for low-income tenants. That's all the information I felt needed to be communicated from staff and the planning commission. I'll go back to the list of scores so you can take a closer look at that. It's also in your packet. Is this policy as it is something the council would feel comfortable adopting tonight? And if not, what information, changes, or time would you need?
Councillor Handley.
I want to thank you, Hannah, for all your good work on this. I really appreciate it. I really like that you've reached out to all the relevant constituents, that you've thought this through as carefully as you have. And I quite like the way it's come out. It seems like a reasonable set of desirables that we would want. And I think it helps gently but clearly to incentivize some of the things that we think are valuable for our city and for our citizens. And I don't think it seems like it doesn't place any unreasonable burdens from the feedback that you've provided. So I'm fully in support and grateful for all the work. So thank you.
Thank you.
The scoring seems fair to the way you've tried to rate the different amenities. I think it is fair.
It was based on scores received for usefulness to residents, cost to the developer, total square footage. We also weighed in the council's survey that went out to you all about your priorities, and then gave extra weight boosts for those amenities that met city priorities.
Okay.
You don't need to see all the tables that went into it, but I promise it was rigorous.
Other questions for Hannah or comments, or are we ready to vote on this tonight, Becky?
So how did you decide the order? Did you just sort them?
The order?
Yeah, the order.
You can
they're
thank legal for that. I had it in score from top to bottom, but then they thought that certain ones should be clustered, like putting all the pet things together, even though they are.
Okay.
So I always do what legal tells me.
That's fine. I was just curious why, because it doesn't seem like it's sorted by score. It doesn't seem like it's alphabetically sorted. And
It's roughly by score, but if there is a common category item, it was pulled up to the highest only item, just they appear together.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's my fault. When Hannah originally sent it out, it was sorted by, well, it wasn't entirely, was it entirely by score the first time
It was
around?
entirely by score, except the outdoor ones at the bottom because.
Yeah, all of that was right. But then I suggested, for example, like the first two, the two electric vehicle ones were separated.
Right.
And that seemed weird to me because it seemed to me like if you were a developer looking at the list, you would be wanting to know what the different electric vehicle options were and not search through the list for them. So I was the one that suggested making some arrangements to pull things that were directly related next to each other, even if it ruined the sorting.
And I should note that this table is very much balanced by the square footage requirements. For example, someone couldn't just put in 5% of spaces with EV charging, ready for EV charging, and then a small bike pump vertical station. Those are both fairly low cost if you put them on early on in the development process, but doesn't meet your square footage requirements. So you still have to provide something that is a more useful open space or media room or clubhouse or playground or something to offset that that's more useful for more residents at a time to meet that concern about EVs not being able to be used by multiple people at once. These two are intended to be dependent purposes.
Just out of a viewpoint, would it be helpful to make those lines a little bit heavier to separate those topics, yeah, because I'm looking at this thinking. Yeah, I can make not rhyme or reason with it with my head. But it would just make more sense to me if underneath that second electric vehicle, you made that line a little bit heavier and then do all those other ones.
Kind of mark the categories a little bit. We could
do that. That's less with what exactly is going to be adopted by ordinance tonight, if it comes tonight, and more with how it's published with the code online.
Exactly,
So we can workshop that.
Exactly, the ease of reading. I don't know, maybe developers are used to seeing this, but my untrained eye is going, this is driving me crazy because I can't make any rhyme or reason to it. Thank you.
And Hannah, you were getting input feedback from developers along the way, I assume.
Yeah, mostly early in the process, and then then we did more workshopping with planning commission and brought it to you. We haven't gone back since, but we didn't feel it was necessary.
Great.
Any other questions or concerns?
I don't think so. Thank you, Hannah. We'll look forward to acting on this tonight then.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a presentation scheduled from the Vice President Zion's Public Finance, Brian Baker, as soon as he shows up. Oh, okay. Okay. Next is a second. Next is a discussion regarding housing and public finance tools. This will be presented by Zion's Public Finance Vice President, Brian Baker. Brian, thank you for coming today.
Absolutely. This is great timing.
It is.
I literally just walked in. You guys are a little ahead of schedule. That's wonderful. So the purpose, I think the request came from the idea that you have stuff coming to you, people asking about various tools and asking the city to use these tools to help them develop in your city.
Mm-hmm.
So you justifiably have questions and wonder, is this smart? Does this make sense? What is the risk to the city? What are the questions we should be asking? What are the reasons that I would or would not do some of these things that I'm going to be asked to do? So, and in fact, I think your next agenda item is an initial presentation about one of these types of projects. And so,
right.
A number of years ago, before you did the public infrastructure district for the medical school, we had meetings, we talked to we came to work sessions. An attorney who works with a lot of these development type financings, Randy Larson from Gilmore and Bell, came as well and helped present. We talked about the creation of PIDs, public infrastructure districts, how they work, why they had come about, and how the tool functioned, and what the possible benefits and opportunities were. At that time, we talked about the city possibly putting together some jurisdictions have put together what they call a PID policy, which kind of governs and dictates that governing entity's approach to how they will use PIDs. Other entities have said, you know what, we'd prefer to just kind of look at these things on a case-by-case basis and not kind of pigeonhole ourselves and make it so that we become inflexible. And in other situations, cities felt that was actually a helpful thing because they had so many coming to them that they could just say, look, here's what we will do them for. Here are the specs and the things that we require. Comply with that, give us your application. But then you could say on the other side, well, then if somebody fits that and gives us an application, we've kind of told them that we're going to accept it because they fit all of our criteria. So you looked at the medical school. It was a great opportunity. I think it is going to be a big success for the city. And it was very simple because, well, we'll get into that, but there are a couple of issues for why the legislature seems to have 70 or 80 bills every session about housing. How can we help? And, the governor's energy policy, which, Senator Curtis was a part of, having the thought, all of the above. Anything that we can try, let's try it. Let's throw it out there, see if it works. That's kind of what the state is doing right now with housing. You have an idea, you can get a legislator's ear. They will likely pass a bill that will give you an opportunity to try to implement the thing that you're doing to see if it will help address affordable housing shortage, any of the issues that we hear about all the time. And so this was just a study that was done. The data is 1.5 years old, but essentially home prices in Utah, this is no surprise to anybody here. Home price and the 2024 data is actually worse. Home prices in Utah are a couple $100,000 too high for the median borrower to be able to purchase. And so if you have kids graduating, getting going with their first real jobs and thinking, I don't want to be dumping money into rent, let's get into something. You're smiling over here. It is a real issue and a problem. I live in Mapleton. We bought our home 7 years ago. We have a son who wants to move up to Salt Lake because that's where his job is. His 1-bedroom apartment rent, when he looked last year, would have been more than our mortgage. And, just timing and things like that. And so that's what we're trying to look at. And that's what the state is saying. How do we help? How do we address this? You'll see in, some cities are like, hey, I live in Mapleton. And so Spanish Fork has said, you want to build 9 million townhomes? Let's do it. And so there you see, and there are rows of them everywhere. And then other cities are saying, wait, we're not so sure about having all of this. They call that high density, but I'm from Los Angeles. That's not really high density. There are other options to get higher density than that. But so the issue is you have a gap in buying power, and the cost that it takes to create the homes is another hurdle, because if somebody comes in and they're going to build a home and it's going to cost, I heard a number in Mapleton for something like $350 a square foot. You do some math on, whatever your average home in Mapleton might look like, and that is a barrier to entry for sure. As developers come and look at trying to put together projects that will provide housing, the earlier they are in the game, the more expensive it is to be financed. Kind of like if a startup company is looking for financing, the investor is going to expect quite a bit of return. And then the further along you get in the process, and the more you have a real product and you have a real thing, then the investors start to say, oh, I see where this is going. I see you've already been selling. I see, oh, now you have profits. That's great. I can put a more realistic investment into this, and I require less of a return because there's less risk to me. And so where, getting through these top level claims to where a bank can finance something, or where a developer can come in and build, in the 4 to 6 or 7% range, that anything you can do to save developers money on the cost of housing makes it more affordable if you do it the right way. One of the things that we heard, I think the state has gotten past that, but for a number of years, anytime there was any sort of developer incentive or financing incentive for developers, they would just ask the question, how do we know we are not just giving a lot of money to a developer who was already going to make money on this, and now they're just going to make more money because we passed a law to give them tax credits or some other thing. And so that's one of the things that goes into these, is you look at it and you say, okay, what's the gap? Where is it that the developer comes up short and says, if I had this help, I could make the units this much more affordable. I could hit these sort of AMI targets. I could build this many more. I could drop the cost of them. And so as a city, you have your vision for what you want to see happen here. And then when you receive proposals and things like that, and you're looking at them, if you say, man, that's exactly the project we want, and they say, yes, but it's really not going to make us any money, and we're not going to do it because of that. But if you were able to help us with a PID or help us with an HTRZ, depending on where it's located, or any of these other tools, that might get us over the hurdle. And then we could bring this project that you want. And it's trying to, when we talked in our Bonds 101 a couple of months ago, it's the difference between what the developer would want, which if I'm a developer and I own land or I have the option on land, I want to build the thing that's going to make me the most money. City has a vision and they say, well, the thing that's going to make you the most money may not necessarily be what we want. As a result, let's talk about incentives and give and take. And if the developer, if they could have made 18% return doing the thing that you didn't want them to do, but they're only going to make 10% return doing the thing you do want them to do, and you can help bridge the gap so that they're willing to go do the thing that is more in the city's best interest and more in the interest of the residents and taxpayers, then that's a plus and that's a positive. And so, again, this is just another illustration there that the closer you get to being ready to build, the less expensive it is. And so these projects, at the state level, they're trying to cut down, the red tape and, difficult issues with zoning and things like that. I'd love to talk. I believe you're probably going to talk through public infrastructure districts in your next item a little bit. But so I wanted to just kind of touch on a few of the highlights. You have already done one. Who was here when you did this? And who remembers it from council? Anybody?
Rocky Mountain.
So yes. And so it's in the past. This is a tool, public infrastructure districts, that has been used a lot. In recent years, a lot of developments in the state are being financed using these. So you might have heard of the Utah Inland Port Authority. All of the transactions that they do are through public infrastructure districts. The Point of the Mountain, they're redeveloping the whole old prison site. Those bonds are going to be issued through a public infrastructure district. Utah City, which is like the stepchild of Vineyard, that's kind of right there by the transit district. That whole thing, they approved 9 or 10 PIDs to go in there. And so it's a thing that's being used a lot. And the reason it's being used a lot is because it does what I just described. It helps to cut developer costs in such a way that you can get a better product if it's done correctly. So the issue when this was passed, a public infrastructure district, you are the creating entity of a public infrastructure district in your city. Welcome, Mayor. And that means that you hold all the cards. You don't have to create it. If you don't create it, it doesn't exist. And they would have to go and look at other options. Because you are the creating entity, you get a lot of input into what the governing document is that creates the public infrastructure district. Once the public infrastructure district is created, it is its own governmental entity, and you have no more power. The only powers you have are those that were included in that original governing document. And so if you, I'm trying to think of a good example where you just create a public infrastructure district and then something happens and you say, oh, wow, we really don't want them to be doing that, but there's nothing about it in the document, or it's specifically allowed in the document. Then you kind of, you're at your limits there, because you don't really have the ability to go in and change what it is that was agreed to originally. And so with a public infrastructure district, you'll have a project presented to you. You might say, hey, that's great. That's the kind of project we want. When the public infrastructure district governing document or the creation document is put together, you want to make sure that it has gone through very carefully so that the city completely understands what are our risks, what are our opportunities, what is it that they can and cannot do without having to come back to us. And in most cases, when these are done for kind of a discrete specific project, the answer is you want to have that all in there so that they go do what they want to do, but also what you told them they could do. And there's agreement on that before the whole thing happens, so that when it's done, you look back at it and say, hey, that's a pretty awesome medical school down there. We're glad that happened. And if we helped them through that public infrastructure district, that's great. We're glad to be a part of that. So there are different types of public infrastructure districts and different purposes. If it's for multifamily housing, or if it's for mixed use commercial, or if it's for a business park, there are different things there where the city could look at it and say, what are the types of things we want to incentivize? What are the types of things we want more of? And if there's a project, is that the kind of thing we want to incentivize? Because you have to create it. If someone came and pitched, they said, hey, we own land and we want to build, we just want a year-round circus there. We want a big tent. We want all this stuff. Can you help us? And if that wasn't something you wanted, you obviously would just say, that's not the type of thing that we're trying to encourage here. And so, no, we're not going to help put that together for you. But if it is a project that you look at and say, this fits with what kind of our vision for this area of the community was and the types of things that we're looking for, then it makes sense to consider what it is that you're going to help provide by creating a public infrastructure district. What you would also want to know is, what is the benefit to them? You know, like, is it, and they call it the but-for argument. Is this a project that you do anyway, and we're just kind of greasing the wheels a little bit or making it more profitable? So either what is the financial gap that this helps to overcome, or what are the enhancements that the project gets that might benefit the community based on us participating here? And so sometimes you'll see things like, well, hey, we'll put in a water tank that the city needed anyway, or we'll put in some trails, or we'll leave some open space, or, you know, things like that, where the city could say, we're doing this, we're helping them, we know there's a financial benefit to them, and what's the benefit to us? Here's what it is. And at the very base case, it could be, they wouldn't do this project without this help here. We want the project to happen. There it is. And on the other, you know, on the top side, it could be, this project becomes more viable and they can do more stuff. And because we're doing this, they're going to be able to add X, Y, or Z, which is something the city would like to see. Yes.
The question I have, you're basically saying, if we already have a development agreement with X, Y, and Z in it, it probably wouldn't do us any good to have something like this, because then this turns around and makes, I guess the question I'm following down, if we have this development agreement, the X, Y, and Z has to be done no matter what.
Yep.
And they just want to make this a more affordable project by doing a PID. Would it really be more affordable having this PID where they have to have their taxes increased, or just having the developer do it and then having him pass that on to the consumer as they buy the home?
It's a great question. And I think the answer that you would get is that the cost of borrowing through a PID is generally lower than the cost of private borrowing for a developer. And so if they're able to go and get tax exempt financing that's secured by, so you're allowed to charge a property tax within a public infrastructure district. And so whether you charge it or not, you can pledge property taxes, and that helps the security of the bonds. So the bonds become, there's a large market for public infrastructure district bonds. Most of those bonds are not rated, which doesn't mean that they're terrible investments. It means that you wouldn't want your grandma and grandpa to probably invest in them, you know, but they're not rated. And so their rates are higher than what, for instance, a Provo City rate would be. If you would borrow at 3.5%, public infrastructure district bonds might be in the 5.5% range. But compared to what they might pay if they just had to go to a bank or try to find commercial financing on their own, that's a bargain. And so that helps them to lower the cost. And so that's something that either increases their ability to do the project or increases what they can add to the project to make it better. One of the questions that is worth asking, especially on residential projects, is if everybody in a specific residential area is paying a slightly higher property tax than everybody else. I mean, you have the ability to put 15 mils or 0.15% on a project. That's bigger than most overall property tax rates for a lot of cities. You know, I mean, so 15 mils would be a huge amount. But if it's 5 mils or if it's 7 mils, the state has taken great lengths to make sure that people who buy homes in those areas understand that they are signing up for higher property taxes, or there's something in the agreement that requires that portion of the bonds be paid off when they're sold to the end user, or, you know, to an individual residential purchaser. Because the issue is the city wants to increase their property tax rate. You go to do that, and then you have some portion of the city that says, man, we are getting we're just getting hosed here. This is terrible, because they're paying a property tax rate that includes the public infrastructure district and what that financed. And so if there isn't good clarity and communication there about who's paying that, how long they're paying that, why they're paying that, what they got out of it from the very moment they buy that home, then the city has, you know, then you could face headwinds when you're trying to increase your overall city property tax rate, because that portion of the residents would think we're already being hit too hard relative to everybody else in the city. Yes.
Have you seen this done in other areas where, because buying especially your first home is so overwhelming and you have the stack of documents and they're going through.
Yep.
Have you seen people just completely space that they have to pay that extra property tax, and then when they get those things, they're just completely upset anyway?
Not so much, because there's some strict requirements on notifications and kind of how that's done. From the state level, that was a very large concern from the beginning with things like that, is that people would find out after the fact that they were getting hit with, 5 mils or 8 mils on a $500,000 home is going to end up being, $1,000 or more every year. And so that is a chunk. And so the idea that it's not disclosed, I don't think that's a problem. The idea that people don't totally process and understand it is another issue. And so again, when you're addressing an application, you can say, okay, what do we do to mitigate that? How do we make sure that anybody who comes in here, before we create this so that you're off to the races, how do we make sure that anybody who is an end purchaser, and it's different for commercial properties and commercial investments and things like that. I think there's an assumption that they're more sophisticated investors and that they would understand this, in a more sophisticated way than your average just retail home purchaser. Yes.
So is there any way to guarantee that any savings that the developer gets from this, say they get cheaper loans or whatever, is there any way to push some of those benefits onto the price of the homes? Or is the argument that you only want to do a PID so that a development actually happens that otherwise wouldn't happen? Or is this actually a tool that can drive down the costs for homeowners?
It absolutely can. It's just like I said, there are a mix of possible benefits. And so if your applicant says, we can't do this unless we get this done, and here's where we're going to price the units, and it's got to be market price, then that's one thing. You would understand that if they're not selling affordable housing, which affordable housing is deed restricted to meet certain AMI requirements, then it comes out on the market and it's going to sell at whatever the market price is. And it would be difficult for them to say this next unit, go down the block, go 2 blocks down, and you can buy this exact same home for $100,000 less because we did a public infrastructure district. Somebody is going to take that benefit, right? If the developer doesn't take it right away when they sell at market price, the person who buys it the first time will flip it and sell it because they'll say, wow, I can make $100,000 just by buying this reduced price home. And because it saves me money relative to the one down the road that other people are already paying for. So it's a conversation with the developer about what the benefit is. You can ask them to calculate the benefit, like how that helps them and what that benefit goes towards. The benefit helps the city because we're putting in a curb gutter sidewalk that you would have needed anyway, or we're putting in a road that you were going to do, but we're getting there ahead of time and we're using this money to help facilitate that. Or, it's going to help us. It's going to help us sell some affordable units at lower AMIs, or it's just going to help us get the project done. And figuring out, again, that's where it's worth putting in the time to do some analysis and say, do we have confidence that we aren't just saying, you were going to make $5 million on this, now you're going to make 10. Thanks for coming. Yeah, glad we could help. That's it. Because there is, the public gets to watch all of this, and you'll have to, whatever you approve, you'll have to be able to look back the next time someone else comes and says, hey, we want to do what they did. You say, ooh, wow, I don't know about that. And then you kind of put yourself in a situation where you want to feel comfortable and confident that the actions you're taking are things that the city feels comfortable doing for specific reasons. And if somebody came in with a similar type of reason, you'd be like, yeah, we feel strongly about that because we did it this time. I don't think you're going to have a lot of other medical schools coming by. BYU doesn't finance anything, as you know, unfortunately. But and so what you'll have is a variety of other projects, mixed use projects, residential projects, different sorts of things where you get to determine, do we like this project and want to facilitate it? And then what's the benefit that comes from this, both to the city and to the developer, and how is that divvied up, and what helps us to feel like this is a good deal for our residents and a good thing for us to be doing. It doesn't cost you money, but it impacts, as we've talked about with things like a property tax levy on the properties. It can impact the way those properties interact with the city in the future. And so that's just something you need to be aware of. But like I said, these are being done in a lot of places, you know, down in southern Utah, very large scale, you know, where you've got, you know, 100 acres of untouched ground, and you can go in there and put in, you know, thousands of homes. That's not the type of project you're going to see here in Provo. But those kinds of things are being done across the state.
I have a quick question,
Yeah.
just to make sure I understand how it works. So we, as the city, would be creating a PID, and the initial board would just be composed of basically the developer, because that's who owns the property right now in that. And then as the developer sells the property, then the board gets repopulated with the residents who are within that.
Yes.
And that board is the one who decides what tax to levy, what mill rate.
Well, it's actually the job of the board of a PID is not that glamorous.
Okay.
If I were living in a PID area, you'd have a hard time getting me on the board, because essentially the reason the PID exists is to issue debt to fund infrastructure.
Yeah.
Once the debt is issued, it's a legal created entity, so it's got to have, you know, it's got to have notifications of meetings, it's got to have annual audits and things like that, and it has to have a board. But the reason it exists is to collect and pay the debt. And once the debt is paid off, it ceases to exist.
So it's only for the issuance of that first debt. The board can't say, we want to do another one.
Well, the debt can be refinanced, and if there, I mean, it would go to what was in the original agreement. If you told the developer, you can't do 15 mills, but you could do 7 mills, and then they issued debt that pledged 4 mills, would they have the ability to come back and borrow against the other 3 mills at some point? Well, possibly.
Okay.
But it is limited in scope, and again, that's why the creation document is important, because that tells you whether they might be coming to you 25 years down the road for another bond, or whether it's just going to be, we're financing this, all the homes will be built, they'll be sold, the bonds will be paid off in this year, and then it's all over.
Okay. And as the creator, we can say when the PID should end, when it should be dissolved.
Well, there will be, they'll be asking, they'll come to you and they'll say, hey, we would like to issue bonds that would pledge, you know, this many mills, or would pledge, you know, maybe we'd pledge an assessment on our own property. The reason generally state level people don't have a problem with this is it's a developer coming to you and saying, we own this land. Can we tax ourselves to make it easier for us to finance this? Can we throw a property tax on ourselves right now? That's who would be paying it, so that we can go put in the curb, gutter, and sidewalk, or put in the pump station, or put in, you know, whatever it is that needs to be put in to facilitate the development. And so, you know, the state looks at it and says, well, yeah, it's your land. I mean, if you want to tax yourself, and if that will help get the development or the residential units or whatever built that the local government wants to see, great, let's do it. And then it just becomes a question of, okay, but after those are built and they're sold, and, you know, property changes hands and stuff like that, does everybody understand what's happened there and feel comfortable with what the ripple effects of that are, and that it's a positive thing? Yes.
So in essence, this is like a special service district?
It is almost like a single purpose special service district that, and in most cases, like at the point of the mountain, they're going to have they're going to issue bonds through a bunch of different PIDs. Like when they do phase 1 and 2 and 3, they'll have a different PID that issues those. They will have an overall governing PID that kind of can help with, you know, the medians. Who's going to take care of like mowing the grass and planting the flowers in the medians of all the streets? Well, that's going to be the governing PID, because Draper doesn't want to pick that up and do it, which is where it's located. And so, a special service district operates forever and provides specific services. That's what they need to do to be able to form. In this case, you're borrowing money to help build something, and the trigger for what ends it is when the debt is paid off. And what the PID actually does while it's in existence, in most cases, is nothing other than collect the taxes or the revenues and pay the debt so that there's not a default on the bonds. One of the things that obviously why the developers like to say, hey, this is great for you because you are not on the hook. They are not asking you to pledge your revenues, to pledge your property taxes, to pledge anything that the city has. If the development completely goes under, the people who have purchased the bonds from them are sophisticated, accredited investors who are, in the olden days, we probably wouldn't call it this anymore, but you used to have people sign what they called a big boy letter that basically stated, I am a sophisticated investor. I understand there's a lot of risk to this. And if it goes under, I have nobody to blame myself. I've done my own due diligence. And so all of the bonds that are sold through these are sold to those types of investors who know what they're getting into. They don't expect them to default, but there is a risk in buying non-rated securities at higher interest rates. They make a lot of money off them, but they also carry the risk of non-payment. And some of the way PID bonds can be structured could be, well, the development didn't happen as quickly as we thought, but instead of, like, if the city missed payments because your revenues didn't grow as quickly, you'd be in default. PID bonds can be structured so that there's the ability to essentially pay what's come in so far and then pay as it comes. And you have investors that are willing to take that kind of risk. I may not get my full payment this year, and it may be delayed and coming down the road, but that's part of the market for those bonds, and it's functional and it's robust and it works. And there are, hundreds and hundreds of millions that were sold in Utah last year, and billions of bonds of similar type sold nationally.
So theoretically, if I didn't have sidewalk and my neighbors didn't have sidewalk, we could all get together and do a PID and the sidewalk in, have to pay it back to our taxes.
Yes, but there's if it was just you and your neighbors, we'd probably just say you could just do it. And the city was like, yeah, we'll help facilitate that. You'd probably just do a special assessment bond, which doesn't involve an outside, in this case, the PID, you wouldn't want to be, I wouldn't imagine residents would want to be their own governing body with their own meetings and financial statements in order to finance curb, gutter, and sidewalk. The city can do that through a special assessment bond, where all of you pledge your properties, and then we calculate how much it would cost each property to put in curb, gutter, and sidewalk, and then you borrow, and you say, okay, over 20 years, that's going to cost your home and every home in that area, $600 a year, or whatever the number would be, and then you could pay it off over time through a borrowing. And a special assessment bond of the city would be a more economically efficient way to do that than a public infrastructure district. Those are it's mainly a developer tool for a new project that has like one landowner, because you do need 100% of landowner consent. So it's usually either one large landowner or like 2 or 3 who get together and say, let's go in on this project. We all agree. And then that enables it to roll forward.
Thank you.
I know you're talking PIDs later, but I want to skip to some of the other important issues here. Let's see, we've kind of talked on more of this stuff and kind of what you're doing. Yep, you all are aware of that. So you can see here, like the PID tax with 12 mills, or with 1 point, it ends up being about 10% of the overall property tax of the area, in that area of Salem. If you put 15 mills on something, that's a significant property tax. I could see them doing stuff. I work with a water reclamation district up in by Park City, the Snyderville Basin Water Reclamation District. They have the largest sewer impact fee in the state. It's like $28,000. And it's just, that's what you pay if you want to buy a lot up there. That's just the sewer impact fee, because that's what it costs to do that up there. And so in certain places, a higher property tax rate doesn't, no one bats an eyelash, but I would guess in Provo, like most of our local municipalities, there would be, the people who buy those properties would want to know what they were getting into and what that was going to cost them. Let's see. So again, this is just, you need to make sure you understand what you're getting out of it. And it could be parks and trails or reduced buy-in costs for residents, just making the project affordable.
Wait, can you explain that? Because that's what I was asking about, and I don't understand how this
how this helps with costs.
Well, so if there are, if infrastructure is built such as a road that wouldn't have otherwise existed, and maybe that road goes to one development, but there's spots for like several other developments there, it makes it more affordable for other people to come in later. And let's see. So you have the city has you've done a lot of redevelopment agency type of stuff over at the mall and other places. This just basically says that a public infrastructure district is for the city, it's off balance sheet. It's not something that goes in your audit. It's not something that you have to report and say, this is something that we were a part of. You do have to do that for instance, like helping the Food and Care Coalition or issuing debt through Southern Utah Valley Solid Waste or entities like that. But in this case, it's a completely separate entity. So I will not spend more time on that there. HTRZs, this was the other issue that we were asked about. So the idea with an HTRZ, Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone Act, the idea was to help promote economic growth around transit hubs, which makes all the sense in the world. If you can, if you can live next to a transit hub, they talk about I work with UTA a lot, and they talk about the last mile being the most difficult part of transit. Like I live in Mapleton. For me to get from Mapleton to your front runner station, if I didn't have a car, is pretty much impossible. For me to get to the closest bus from where I live in Mapleton to then get the bus to the front runner station is also almost impossible. It'd be about a 3-mile walk. And so what they're trying to figure out how to do is, well, if a whole lot of people live right next to the transit station, wouldn't that facilitate a lot of economic growth? Wouldn't, you put a bunch of, condos, townhomes or whatever close by. And so there are a lot of people there. There's a nexus of demand for services, for restaurants. And then on the other end, I know people who take tracks or front runner into Salt Lake and they walk a block and a half to their office. The church office building, a huge percentage of the employees of the church office building use that. University of Utah for a time had like 90% of their students using public transit to access. At a time 2 decades ago when transit was brand new and there wasn't a lot in Utah County, and they talked to BYU and they talked to the University of Utah said, we're going to give all of our students a pass. And they had an incredible usage rate. And then, and what they were able to do was actually build a lot of buildings by demolishing parking. They had a lot of surface parking and they just say, we don't need this anymore. So they could, plow over a concrete parking lot and put a new building there. Whereas at BYU, for a while, we were building more parking because everybody wanted to bring a car. And I think that's kind of maybe peaked out when we have the UVX going, which has been fantastic. It's so fun to go by and see that and how many people are using it. Transit Reinvestment Zone, designed to help address the housing problems with mixed-use, multifamily, affordable housing developments within a 1/3-mile radius of front runner stations. I assume somebody here has taken a measuring stick and gone from the platform of the front runner station down to the mall to just kind of make sure that we can get there, that you can touch the edge of one of those pieces of property, because that's all that is required. If any part of the parcel falls within that 1/3 mile, then you're good and it covers the entire thing. But so what this would do, in the olden days, when somebody wanted to do a tax increment financing or collect tax increment, they had to meet with the taxing entity committees. So they'd have to go and they'd have to talk to Central Utah Water and say, we would love to build this project and we'd like to take the property taxes that would have accrued to you and take 80% of them or 100% or whatever portion for ourselves to help pay for that. The most difficult conversation was always with the school district, right? Because of your property tax bill, more than half of it goes to the school district, and that's true everywhere in the state. And so a lot of these projects would have a difficult time getting buy-in from the different taxing entity committees. And so the legislature naturally steps in and says, hey, we'll just do this, then they don't get a say. So that doesn't sound super nice, but that's essentially what it does, is if you go through the HTRZ creation process and it is approved, then their taxes are committed over the period that the HTRZ exists, and there's really no rejoinder or anything that they can do about it. But the idea is they made it tailored and specific enough that they're not going to pop up everywhere, because you've got to be right where there's a nexus of transit and potential development that can facilitate this growth. And so, couple of things that are interesting for the city: you create and submit the proposal. So when you have someone who comes to you and says, hey, this is what we'd like to do with XYZ land, it's something that the city would help put together and turn it into the Governor's Office of Economic Development. They would have an independent review of the proposal. Zions Banks works with the state, and we have done most of those so far. Like, we'll do the review. And the idea of the review is the but-for analysis. What is the economic benefit that accrues from taking property taxes from the school district and everybody else over this time period? And what does that do for the project that couldn't otherwise be done? And because it's housing and transit, with a focus on housing, the real focus is how many affordable units are there, and doing the HTRZ, how many more affordable units do we get, or what income thresholds can we hit? Can we lower to, because we're making this project more affordable by facilitating the infrastructure, some of the infrastructure investment up front through the HTRZ. So the HTRZ committee, if they approve the proposal, then bonds are issued that are backed by that tax increment. And so we've seen these be successful in the state. And again, there aren't a lot of places that they can be done. Does anyone have any questions? This is a different slide. Does anyone have any questions about HTRZs?
How often do you see them denied by the state?
A couple of times, but honestly, I can quite candidly say that the applications were terrible. I mean, it was just like, you looked at the application and said, I think all of these, like, all of the numbers are wrong. I mean, it's the state wants these things to happen. And so the question is this the type of thing they want to see happen? I don't see a lot of politicking at the HTRZ committee about favoring one area or developer or project over another. They're just trying to see, does this really do what the HTRZ is supposed to do, which is enhance the availability of affordable housing in a specific area? And if it doesn't, then they have some explaining to do, because that's the whole purpose of it. Yes.
So Bill, is this gonna be an RDA? Because the city makes and submits the proposal. That's not gonna be me. Is this gonna be the RDA guy, or is it gonna be Aaron because he's the planner guy? Is this gonna be you?
Will be one of us.
I would say if you have a developer who has a proposal, and you couldn't make the proposal without them, right? So the city, it comes in your name, in the city's name. It's the city's proposal to GoEd. But if a developer has, this is what we're going to do, this is what the scale and the speed with which we're going to build, and what the absorption rate of construction will look like, and this is what they would provide a lot of that information, because that's going to kind of inform the case of whether and to what degree it's necessary.
To me, this falls really clearly under economic development. So the end of that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mike has a question too.
Yes.
Yeah, so I believe state law says that there can only be 8 HTRZs per county. Do you have any information on if there are any current HTRZs in Utah County?
I don't believe there are any that are currently in Utah County. And so you couldn't really have more than 8 in Utah County, because if you took every single front runner stop, that's pretty much it, right? I mean, that would be about it. You have the ability around a bus rapid transit hub, but your bus rapid transit hub, I think, would probably be considered your central station, and Orem's would be considered their station. And so it isn't like Orem could just pick the bus stop right across the street from University Place and say, boom, HTRZ. You actually need a transit hub, which is where kind of things garage and come and go.
By our central station.
Well, the Provo front runner station.
That would be the only one.
Well, that's the place. So,
well, I'm sorry, I'm referring to the UVX. So I thought I heard you saying that a UVX station could qualify.
Well, I don't believe a UVX station can qualify. I think the front runner stations can all qualify, and then anything else that sets up as like, you know, if there was a bus rapid transit thing that went from here out to Eagle, you know, out to Eagle Mountain, and there was a stop at Eagle Mountain, which is where all the buses turn around and garage, they'd probably develop legislation. Again, if you thought, man, we could really use one over here.
I was just
call
thinking
your
about
representative.
the two universities.
Yes.
And their connection to UBX, wondering if like one of the BYU stops meets the criteria for something where you could say you've got a need for high density housing. You already have a lot of high density. I'm not necessarily saying I think this is a good idea. I'm just curious if it's even an option.
I don't think it currently does.
Okay.
I don't think a bus rapid transit station will, and you'd have to find enough land that was not owned by the university to make it, you know, because all of that land is tax exempt. Let's see.
George, I think that's where UVU wins.
So we have CRAs, which is kind of the old economic development tool, which Provo City used. You did a great job of. You know, the Covey Center for the Arts was built with redevelopment agency funds. Public infrastructure districts, which you're gonna be up to your ears in. You know, I mean, this is kind of like the new tool. I looked at, I got a list of like the deals that all of my colleagues are working on, and like half of the deals that they're working on right now involve public infrastructure districts of some kind or another. Housing and transit reinvestment zones, we just kind of touched on. First home investment zones. So there are a couple of new things that have come along and not been used very much. Home ownership promotion zones. These are set up specifically to get affordable housing done. And some of them, you have specific amounts of land that need to be covered. And they're the types, both of these are the types of things that if you're talking, someone wants to put together like 8 homes or something like that, that's not what you're looking at. And so in a place like Provo, where you'll have some new development with the ability to put in 20, 30, 40 plus homes, but generally not a lot of that, you know, because you'd have to bulldoze a couple of blocks, and there isn't a lot of just pristine land that hasn't been touched. These are less likely here for that reason, but all of them have specific affordable housing targets. And if the developer approaches you and says, we'd like to look at doing something like this, because then we think we can make 60% of the homes at 80% of the county median sales price, that would be something that I would think would be attractive here. In Park City, everything's so expensive that they've gone from, they talk about affordable housing sometimes, but then they use the word attainable housing, right? Because affordable is specific, you know, 60 and 40% AMI, that's really tough to hit. But in Park City, if you're making 120% of AMI or 140%, can you afford a home? No. So, you know, those people don't qualify for affordable housing, but they also can't buy a home any other way. So there are levels of need, and the tools are being designed and put in place to try to help address all of those needs in different ways. So when banks get involved with developers, there are low-income tax credits that can be used and applied for. And typically the city doesn't need to be too involved in stuff like this. It would usually be the developer who would put something forward with the planning commission and say, hey, we want to build this, and it's going to have this many affordable units, and we're going to use LIHTC credits and something like that. And those would be, those are great things, because if you can get that benefit, that helps to really drive down the level of affordability. You know, so like here with the 4%, you're looking at you know, less than 50% of AMI on 20+% of the units, and that's in the range where you probably have a lot of people in Provo who would fit those income thresholds and love to be in some sort of a home. These are just some different examples that we've seen around. You know, a lot of you know, I love the apartments across from the new temple, and just so Provo gets to sit back and look and say, okay, what is our vision for things? And developers will come and say, hey, we got something that looks just like this, and we'd like to pitch you on it, and here's how we think it fits in. And then you get to decide, does that fit in with what we're looking for and want? And then based on that, what are the steps that we can take as a city to help promote that? So they tweak the legislation every year. All of these bills, the PID bill, it's been tweaked every single year. And so those are changes, nothing crazy that we're seeing right now. And then this is just like kind of a summary slide. If you're trying to incentivize people to build here, then you can see the two different sides of what the city is able to do by basically deregulating, you know, like trying to make regulation less onerous and difficult, and at the same time providing incentives and helping out where you can when the developer vision matches your vision, or you can bring those two together and make them work together because there's some incentive being provided to the developer that was different from what they wanted to do, but will make the project more viable for them if they have your help. It's great when it's great to see cities and developers work on these things like kind of hand in hand, because a lot of times it really is projects that you want to see happen and they want to see happen. It'll be good for them. You want every developer who builds in your community to have a great experience and to make money, right? You don't, I mean, that's the goal, is for them to be able to do that, to help bring about the vision of what you want to see happen in the city. And so it's trying to get those forces to converge in a way that works for everybody. And I have more stuff in there. If anyone has any questions about any of those other slides, you're in a great place where compared to all the other Wasatch Front counties, commute time for workers in Utah County is lower than all the other big counties. And so it's kind of a good thing, which means that workers have access to jobs that are close, and that makes it easy for them to kind of stay close to where they work. Yes.
What does this LIHTC stand for?
Low income housing tracts.
Thank you.
Part of Crossing and Liberty Center, but LIHTC.
Which ones?
Part of Crossing. And
Oh,
Liberty Center.
so that's like the Section 8 kind of financing, is that it?
It's low income. So I think 80% of those buildings are low income units and they have a percentage of lot.
So have you worked your computer magic and drawn your line and said that mall property is within a third of a mile of the front runner station?
I believe it is.
Google Maps was no help to me. You need a GIS, and I'm pretty sure I thought to myself, like the first time I heard mall and HTRZ, I thought, well, the very first thing anybody would have done is map that out just to make sure that it was in. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that'll do it.
Questions? It's been very helpful, Brian.
Yeah, and again, if you have questions about the slides, or again, as you go through presentations and discussions about different projects, you might have other questions come up. That's what we're around for. So
it felt like a high-level MBA class on the computer. You really helped us work through it.
Thank you. Not the intention. My colleague, so we hired a guy from Park City who was there. He was a budget analyst, but he was kind of too smart for their budget office. And so they called him head of data analytics. And not many cities have a head of data analytics, but so he was economic development director, head of data analytics. And he put together a lot of stuff. I skipped through, so further down, there are some slides that like, they'll just numb your mind in terms, like stuff like this. Like he looks at residential square footage and commercial square footage per worker and compares and contrasts them basically to show where you are on the spectrum of how desirable and usable your county is compared to other. I mean,
I did try to read that.
It is MBA type of stuff, and so we didn't need to get into it. I think the basics are more important for sure. And if anyone wants to get crazy, I'm happy to get Eric on the phone and we can go through it. So
I have a quick side question. On one of the first slides, it was the median home prices versus the median borrowing power. And it looks like our buying power has dropped.
Yes. Well, and I mean, that's inflationary powers.
That's just because of inflation.
Yes. Yeah. And so you
like
can,
those bars, it's so depressing.
and it's, I mean, you can say whatever you want about the state of Utah, but the fact that we have the third or fourth or fifth highest housing prices in the country means that a lot of people who could move anywhere else for a lot less money want to move here anyway, which is a pretty commendable thing, you know, and we can argue whether that's good or bad, but I mean, it is the fact of life that people would rather pay $500,000 for a home here than $180,000 in Illinois. And you could get the same home.
So what's this January 17th, 18th, night? Do we fluctuate that much in like 5 days or?
That's here. That's here.
That's here.
January 2017.
Oh, so those aren't like dates, those are years.
Yeah.
You say that 2024 is even more disparate.
Yep. And I don't know when we can build a lot of housing and we can arrest every illegal immigrant, I guess, but you know, but I don't know that undoes the imbalance of the upward pressure on housing prices. I mean, we saw people in Mapleton, even though mortgage rates are really high, which depresses home prices because it makes the borrowing power more costly, we're still seeing people pricing things at rate. I don't know how well they're selling, but prices haven't come down a lot. I'm sure you've seen the same thing here. It's like it's not like homes are 20% less expensive because mortgage rates are high. So we're kind of just still dealing with the same issues.
Well, Brian, thank you again very
You
much.
bet.
We'll put
Happy to
this
be here.
education to use right away. Thank you. Okay, next we have a presentation regarding a proposed public infrastructure district, PID, for Slate Canyon development with Leonard Homes. This will be presented by Betsy Fowler and Megan Murphy. Betsy Fowler Russell.
Thank you. And I believe some of my colleagues were going to join by Zoom. Are they? Connie is one from the underwriter, and I believe Megan Murphy will be online as well.
Not seeing Megan Murphy.
Okay.
Connie Gonzalez, not seeing Megan Murphy.
It's okay. If she may join, if you want to just keep an eye out. So
you're Betsy?
I'm Betsy.
Nice to meet
Yes.
you. Thank you
Nice
for
to meet
joining.
you. Thank you, and thanks for having us. Though we're talking about this project, as the Slate Canyon PID for the first time, this project itself has been before you numerous times. I think most, in particular, is it happened last July when the developer came before you with the development plan. And there was extensive discussion, not about the PID, but about the development policy itself. There was also, and we'll get into this, the resolution prior to that or with that, that was passed last July to amend the critical hillside overlay zone in relation to this property. It was referred to as the Buckley Draw property previously. And so do I have the ability to, is this me? Okay, all right. Well, half the presentation, half of the points that I was going to make were made in the last presentation. There may be more questions obviously very specific to this governing document and this project. I am an attorney with White Bear, Ankley, Tanaka, and Waldron. And we will be, if the PID is established, we will be counsel to the PID, but we're brought on board by the developing team. I have the Lennar folks are here with us today to answer very specific questions about the development. And we also have DA Davidson, Sam Elders here to answer questions about the bond structuring specifically. So we'll move into that. I don't know quite what button to push or where to aim. Where do I aim?
Aim right here.
Oh, right there. Okay.
Let me hit this side. Here, I can show you.
Is it this button on the side?
No, that's just.
Sorry, Justin.
Oh, you're good. Just bad. Kind of faded arrow.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you. Okay, obviously, we're here for the Slate Canyon Public Infrastructure District. And it should be in the packet materials that you have, should be the governing document or the proposed governing document, but there is also the letter of intent. and also the petition to go along with the property or with the project. The governing document typically, and by the way this is done in other cities or other counties, usually there is the LOI and petition that are submitted. This city will then give some feedback and ask for the governing document. But it depends on the municipality or where we are. I don't need to do a summary of public infrastructure districts because that has already been done. And you have the governing document, I believe, in your materials. We wanted to get feedback from you, from the community. There has, I think as already stated, I don't want to repeat a lot that was already done, but in 2021, the first PID, and I believe it was the first PID in the state of Utah, you guys passed for the medical campus, the Norda College. We're here a few years later. There was also a lot of discussion, and I know it was mentioned in the previous meeting, about the role of PIDs, whether Provo would adopt a PID policy. And here we are, like we said, 3 years later, 3.5 years later, you don't have a PID policy in place. I'm not sure if that's something you're still considering, but we're happy to talk on that as well. But we're happy for any feedback. Obviously, the PID Act was passed in Utah first in 2019 and is undergoing different legislative changes, but essentially has only been in Utah for the past 3 years, 4 years. And there are of lots of other states that have used PIDs or special districts for financing structures, and we can talk more specifics here. I think this was also covered, the reasons for the PID. It addresses not necessarily a lack of existing funding, but it creates an avenue for funding for infrastructure improvements. And I think the time factor is extremely helpful because it facilitates the timely implementation of the public infrastructure as we're looking at completing a development. Also, as mentioned previously, it does provide a financially responsible solution to support growth, and it's not necessarily connected to the finances of the city. And feel free to ask any questions. Whether I have answers to those questions is a different matter, but if you have questions, feel free to chime in. As was stated, it's up to the city council. In that governing document, the city council essentially establishes the criteria that the public district or infrastructure district will be bound by. And so there are pros and cons. As you have discussed and questions have been asked, what we would ask you to keep in mind, obviously, is the historical performance of the district applicant. Here, the original developer, R&D, it was Dave Morton, who I believe worked with the city, and the staff was phenomenal in coming up with the development agreement that is in place now. Lennar Homes is a fantastic company. We'll talk more about that as well as a builder for the credit worthiness of the district applicant. I'm trying to see what we can skip through and don't need to talk about. We will talk more about the proposed development, and the Lennar team will cover that. Historically, I've kind of already touched on this. This isn't the exact master plan, but this is one that I think you have seen before. The actual documents are in the packet. But this is to create, this PID would be essentially to construct 110 residential home sites. And it would include access to the hiking trails, community garden, pickleball courts. And one thing does this have a pointer? Maybe, maybe not. Do I have this? Oh, well, I'm not sure how familiar, I think everybody's familiar with where this area is. So there will be connection. You see the trailheads, the public hiking trails that will connect up to the old Bonneville Shoreline Trail, and then up essentially into the Slate Canyon Trailhead. As mentioned, there has already been the zoning, the zoning ordinances and regulations amended back in July. And currently it is the R1.8 zoning ordinance. Any questions here or on numbers or, okay. I guess I asked, but I didn't look to see if there were any. This again is a given about what the public infrastructure will fund. Obviously, the public utilities, water, sewer, drainage improvements. There was much talk about the watershed and where water would go. I believe now it's arranged to go down into the Bicentennial Park. The public utilities, and as we mentioned, the trails and open space to be dedicated to the city from the district. Specific to this project, the maximum debt mill levy for this project is the 6 mills. Under statute, as was mentioned previously, allowable up to the 15 mills, but here asking for the 6 mills with a maturity rate of 30 years, upon which time the PID, basically there would be dissolution or dissolvement of the need for the PID. One difference between the initial application that I'm not sure you saw here, initially the placeholder amount was a $10 million amount that has been reduced to a $5 million tax debt limitation. And that's based on the engineer's cost. And that is part of the petition that you have in your packet. Estimated cost, $4,700,000. And then the tax limitation that we're asking for obviously needs to be a little bit more to be able to cover any cost of inflation or unseen or undue expenses as time passes. When we look at the 2024 tax rates, and this is the question we tend to get most often, is what exactly is it going to mean to a homeowner? This is based on the actual market value of a home at $600,000, which the assessed value at 55% would be $330,000. We see the different taxing entities in this graph and the tax amounts that they charge and the percent compared to the PID mill rate of 6 mills. We see that yearly total then come to approximately the 1,980, about $165 per month. And that would be the cost, the tax cost for the homeowner.
And then when that PID matures in 30 years, that disappears.
That disappears, yes.
I have a question. So is that roughly just under $2,000 per household going to be flat throughout the 30 years? You know, the rate's gonna
No,
adjust?
from my understanding, that's a very good question. That tax amount changes per the assessed value. So where the property is assessed yearly and the property taxes are assessed, that 0.006, the 6 mills adjusts based on the property value.
But that's a year's worth of tax.
That's a year's worth, yeah.
Right, but that usually, I mean, half how I understand this is if the city requires $30,000, that is spread out amongst all of the residents within, or, you know, taxable entities within Provo. And then that mill rate adjusts according to, you know, the inflation of the house or whatever. So it can go down, right? As long as we're keeping that constant amount. So what I'm thinking is the payback is probably going to be constant. And that mill rate's gonna adjust, but you're saying no?
No, the mill rate stays unless there's a refinancing that happens.
So does
And
that mean they pay it off
Sam may
faster?
want to chime in and speak to this, but I believe that the 6 mills stays in place unless there is a refinancing that happens. So the actual amount and the percentage that will be paid, yes, that number that will be fluid and it will move. And this is just to give you a snapshot estimate based on the 2024.
So does the loan have a variable interest rate or is it a fixed interest rate?
No, it's a fixed interest rate.
So does
Go
that mean
ahead, Sam.
that if this goes up to $2,500, then the debt's gonna be paid off faster?
Yeah, so I can describe that a little bit more. Sam Elder from PA Davidson may be acting as an underwriter instead. So the tax rate in the governing document that would be decided by the council to get approved would be set, right, to a maximum amount that they could impose, which you would, in this particular instance, the development team is asking for 6 mills. So they could not impose more than 6 mills. But to your point, as assessed value increases over time, that mill levy remains constant. But if that inflation in assessed value outpaces the projected absorption or our bond schedule, then the bonds will get repaid more quickly or get refinanced. And typically in these deals, in almost every deal that we do, let's say they initially go out with 6 mills, as the board transitions to the homeowners who live there, they'll refinance the debt and lower the mill levy. So today it starts out at 6, but in year 5 or year 6, when the development's completed and there's 110 different property owners making tax payments, they'll choose to lower the mill levy imposed because things are going better or things are going as planned. And so you'll see all of these mill levies get reduced by some margin at some point because the homeowners ultimately choose to decide to lower that.
That's generally what you're saying, but that's not necessarily.
If the development doesn't happen as planned, there could be the potential that the 6 mills remains outstanding. But there are structural components in the bond that say even if the development happens according to plan, it's still going to get better. And the reason why is because, for example, when we originally issued the bonds, we're projecting out that the developer is going to build 100 homes over 5 years. That's a pretty risky investment for an investor to take, saying, oh, they're going to build these homes over the next 5 years. These product types are going to come in at this price point. The assessor is going to assess the home at this price, and that's your repayment vehicle. But once built out, there's 110 unique property owners making a tax payment. The credit becomes diverse. It becomes like a mini city, right? And so we'll issue the bonds at a higher rate today, but once there's 110 homes, we can refinance the debt at a lower interest rate because it's a more diverse tax base that's making a payment. One person misses their tax payment, it doesn't impact the debt service.
Have you seen that even with the rise in inflation?
Yeah, I mean, rising inflation would actually help repay these bonds more quickly because there would be more tax revenue coming in.
No, I mean like in 2020, you had a bid in 2020, let's say you had a 3% rate, interest rate, and then today it's 7%. So obviously you really want to refinance that to today's rates. I mean, are you still seeing that today, even though the interest rates are so high?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with the amount of increases that rates have gone over the last little bit, the refinancing, even if you got the credit enhancement, meaning the security of the deal became better, you're not necessarily going to refinance it then because the macro environment increased substantially. So that could happen for sure.
So they just sit on it.
So the bonds could, so if they don't pay by year 30, there's a 10-year discharge date. That means is that the taxes can be collected for an additional 10 years before the district will dissolve. So if the bonds haven't been repaid by year 40, the district goes away and the tax goes away no matter what. Bondholders just took the loss.
And my next question is, why would we want to do this for you? What did we get out of it?
Well, when you're saying for you, so I would be counsel for the district. So you may want to direct that question towards the developer. And I'll answer that as to what benefits I see or why a pit is a good idea in the economy of today. Was there another question that goes with that or?
Oh, I'm just gonna answer it.
Oh, go ahead. Sure.
I think one thing is that those comparables we got, right, from that other development that they were looking at, we've required all these to be owner occupied. That's a huge deal. It's a huge thing that we got in return for this development. And the prices are going to probably lower those houses because they can't be bought by investors. So we'll keep the prices not getting, kind of jacked up like our when investor pools come in. And so they may be paying a bit more on the tax side of it, but they're going to get homeownership with the community. It's all homeownership that's well maintained and kept and has all the benefits of the roads, the trails and the fencing and the trail walkways and the pickleball. So I think we're going to have to do some give and take to get these developments we want that can create and improve home ownership and give people an opportunity to start climbing that ladder.
So that raises a question in my mind about, well, I mean, didn't we already get that in the original decision? And if not, or even if we did, if we create a PID with that incentive, which I share the goal, but I'm worried that it creates the precedent every time we say, we approve this, but we want this percentage home ownership, and then it sort of defaults to, well, you gave a PID to this development, now you've got to give one here, and then it just becomes an expectation. So I don't know.
This is an area that has zero infrastructure, which is hard.
And there is built into the governing document, there is no guarantee. There is no guarantee that the next project will be approved. It was the work that was done leading up to this meeting where with the developer, I saw that the homeowner occupancy, the 1-year occupancy was put in to that development agreement. It is in the development agreement that's in the packet today. And that does pass to the next buyer. So it's a 1-year.
I'm just trying to hear the but for that we were just learning about. Like what?
I think it's a great question to ask. And I would just add, having been in many of these meetings across the state where these have been approved, you're looking for particular features within a development where this type of tool makes sense. Because I do not believe that this tool makes sense for every project. There are certain projects where a developer will approach us and say, hey, can you help us analyze and go into a city and help them present on why a PID would be needed for this project? And we would say, sorry, it isn't. Go find traditional forms of capital to pay for this project. Some of the features here, I mean, obviously development features, right? When you're approving something in a development agreement, you could say, I want these types of things, but there has to be a give, right? How can you pay for these things? These tools could definitely help that. In this particular instance, that was done out of good faith, I think, to some extent, where they're approaching you now on a PID after they've already agreed to do that. But there are certain elements within this development that I think are different, right? You're improving an area of the city that hasn't been developed very frequently or is not, as easy to access. So you're going to have to bring infrastructure further, which is expensive. To Brian's point earlier, trying to get banks to come in and provide capital for offsite improvements before you're able to deliver your first home for repayment of their loan is really difficult, especially as interest rates started to click up and banks started to dry up on the amount of capital they had to lend. The other things here are the amenities, right? When you're looking at potentially imposing additional taxes on someone, it's like, what are you getting out of this, right? You look at this, over 40% of the site is open space, right? In order to make that pencil, right, you got to have efficient financing vehicle to be able to fund that, especially up front. So you think about parks and trails, pickleball courts, other public amenities are things you want to point to is like, how are you going to finance these things? So I think as the development, as you're looking at this deal, they're looking for some efficient capital to help offset some of those costs. As you saw, the total cost of public improvements here is about $4.7 million to deliver 110 homes. The bonds at 6 mils are only gonna net them about $1.5 million. So they're only asking for it to cover some portion of the development, and this is an ultra efficient way for them to do so. So I think those are the things that you point to, right? As what's unique about this development that you may not see when you're doing some infill location development right in the heart of the city.
I guess my pushback a little bit would be, wouldn't you have that as a developer all in line? Read all of this? You should have everything in play.
Yeah, when you're underwriting the deal, right? When you're choosing to purchase it or not purchase it, right?
Yeah.
People are making those decisions. I think sometimes there are some things that are unexpected, like cost increase, or you want to provide something that you didn't originally think you wanted to, or some enhancement to the community. I think these are ways to make it work better, right? So here's how I kind of view it, and this is just an opinion, but I think when you go in to create an approval on a development agreement, and the city's agreeing with that, you're approving the development that you want to see happen in your city. And if it's difficult to facilitate that by using something like this, you're providing a tool to actually see that through. Right? So I think it is giving the ability for this project to have more of a chance at success to deliver what you were ultimately looking for when you approved the development agreement.
But aren't they bound by the development agreement anyway?
They are, it's just, sometimes deals go sideways because they're unable to finance it, they're not able to obtain the right capital to do it.
But then they'd have to come back to us.
Amend the development agreement, or, the deal goes under and they sell it to some other person who, develops in the next 10, 15 years, and since they're potentially as a blighted area. I'm not necessarily suggesting that's the case here. I'm not saying that we're not going to deliver what they said in their development agreement without this, but I do think it can enhance the community. And we're likely to provide all of those amenities and infrastructure up front without having to wait for the last unit to be delivered before they had capital to provide some of those amenities.
Thank you.
All right, very good questions. Thank you, Sam. I keep pushing the wrong button. Obviously, this is talking about the governance and oversight. I think we have already covered that, but the governing document here provides for, it would be a board of 5, I believe. And initially, those individuals be appointed by the city council. And then as the area is populated based on percent, then they would have individuals voted onto the board. So they would represent themselves essentially. The board, and one thing I think that's really interesting and worth noting here, and this was noted by Randy Larson when they were discussing PIDs, is that the purpose of the PID isn't, they don't have the power or the ability to create ordinances, or they're here as a financing tool or a financing mechanism. Strictly that. So when we look at the governance and oversight, I agree with Brian's comment that not super exciting for those board members. And I think.
So when you say appointed by the city council, you don't mean nominated, you mean approved, because we have the slate here.
Yes, those names are in the petition before you, and they are all agents of the developer property owner. And right now there are no, and that's one requirement of the governing document or of the PID, is that 100% of the property owners have to agree to the creation of the PID. And so that's where we have here this undeveloped ground. So the developer has agents that are the essential, the members of the PID board. I think Sam has covered, or these issues have mainly been covered. I do want to touch upon just Lennar, the site plan, the development agreement. It's a fantastic development agreement, and I believe that the PID certainly does ensure the high quality infrastructure instead of a piecemeal that you see at times when some financing comes or all of the financing is required up front. With the PID, we can see, or the public infrastructure district financing, you can see that high quality from the very beginning. And I'll defer to the Lennar team. Did you have anything that you wanted to add today to this, or to answer in addition to any of the questions, either BJ or Xander?
Wait, before you address that, I do have one more to George's point earlier. The savings that you would get from a PDD versus a regular loan, where's that gonna go? Is that going in your pocket, or is that going to lower the prices of the homes? Or?
So my answer to that is, so the savings, a PID will create for, I think traditionally what you see is you see a developer who would pay for the whole project, and then the cost of the home goes onto the homeowner initially or upfront. Here, what we see is those costs can be lowered because the homeowner is agreeing to pay on a tax base over a 30-year period of time. And so it flattens that cost, and the developer is able to use a lower price point and a more affordable home. And there was much talk with this developer about the price point being very specifically within a certain range to try to help with the city's view in this area in particular. I hope that answers the question. I didn't mean to I'm sorry.
That's something we can put on the PID, is that the savings goes to the home, not necessarily to the developer.
I don't think it's necessarily in the PID language, but it's the nature of the financing mechanism. Because you're spreading payment over 30 years, it is the purpose of the PID.
Thank you.
So my name is Jay Ryan, so if you have any questions about who we are or what we do, it's a great time to ask it. As you saw, the developers agreement, we've already submitted what our exteriors look like. So we know what we're building. The question is interesting. The development costs are the development costs. So we get that from that, but from to comprehend maybe it's affordable housing business. Now you're not buying the full value of the house. Yes, they have to pay it back, but it in essence allows us to pay people, and the homeowner is not improving that. There's a portion of it.
Can you put the microphone to your mouth, please? It's hard to hear online.
Is the mic not on?
Oh.
They can maybe have that.
He can come up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
How's that?
Yeah.
Looks better. Thank you.
Yes, you bet. So there is that, it spreads the costs out. We still get paid for the infrastructure installed, but the homeowner is completely paid that price. There's a tail that they pay. Also, when you buy a house, you have to buy the house in full. If you have a PID, if you want to live in the house for 5 years, your exposure to it is only 5 years. So it's interesting, it's new, but that is to the home. For us personally, I think there was some questions about how quickly there was mentioned what happens if things fall apart. We are an extremely sound company. We are the second largest builder in the country. We have about 80,000 home units this year. We are very well capitalized. We are very well supported in what we do. So what would you like to know about us? What would you like to know? Anything we'd like to know? There was talk about, what happens if things fall apart down the road? Historically, that doesn't happen to us. We will be building 6 homes a month once we start this community. We don't vary from what we do. We say we're going to do 6 months, we're doing 6 months. We're not waiting for 6 buyers to show up. We're building 6 homes. So you take that 6 homes a month by
like 110, 6 homes a month, we're gonna move through this extremely quickly. So therefore, you get the large group of people coming together. Back to your question about what happens down the road when the homes are actually bid, and they have some options. Refund. But we will move through this very quickly. We are a mortgage company, home builder, we are own title company, we incentivize work with us, so we are very low. And we will get this through the engineering portion of our design, and we will do it very expeditiously. We would love to be turning dirt in 2 months, and right now we are targeting building homes at the beginning of August. So we have a plan.
And that includes infrastructure.
Yes, so yes, it does. There is a big portion of the open space which we will have minimal impact on, but we will coordinate with the city for the trailhead restroom, trailhead parking lot. We have some of our own infrastructure, such as pickleball courts, some raised beds, some playground equipment. So for 1R, we try and get that infrastructure installed as we get built. Sometimes we can't, sometimes we can't do everything at once, just because logistically we can't. But for us to have our amenities in upfront as quick as possible, it makes the community more sellable, makes it look better. We have homeowners who will be paying HOA fees, so the quicker we get their amenities in, the quicker they see the value.
What's the anticipated price point on these homes right now, the range?
I think we're in 550s.
So with 550, the numbers we saw earlier, 600, were about 2,000 a month. So that's about 60,000 over a 30-year period. That they would be paying on that, right? But maybe not necessarily one owner the whole time, because it could be sold subsequently. All right. Well, that's kind of, it's not affordable housing, but it's in line with what we're charging for everything else, and it's not.
That price is amazing.
Yeah, for the size of these homes,
What's the square footage of these homes?
all much bigger than my house.
And the
basement,
Yes.
18 to 24. The basement is
These are like good projects, including basement, I think the all these are well over 500 square feet, like 500 to 4,000 square feet.
Yeah. So that price per square footage is pretty good.
Can I say something on that?
Yeah.
The price point of the home is the thing that has made me most nervous about this project, because as careful as I think Anderson Development, going through the entitlement process, we've seen so many times the developer makes commitments like price point, and when it gets sold to the builder, and the builder actually costs everything out, has to pay for every foot of asphalt and every shingle. The builder says, I can't do it for that. And we have to go this whole renegotiation. It was my recollection that that price point wasn't an important thing to council. It was never imagined to be affordable housing. It was never imagined to be workforce housing, but it was promised to start at a more reasonable price range. To me, that's the benefit. If PID helps deliver that price range, then it's worth doing. To me, that's much more important than the trail and even the pickleball courts, as much as I can admit that. But the price point is what's really significant to me.
Yeah, that price range seems to be incredibly reasonable for that size product in our current market.
But when it's resold, it'll be sold for market rate, right? So it won't be as affordable again. It's just, the PID is just gonna make it affordable just for entrance into.
It has to be over occupied, so it can't be bought by an investor.
You have to flip that on again. I just turned it on.
Yeah, I'll try to add a little bit more input there. I think you can't control the market value of a home, right? And so I think you can only choose at the beginning what you sell it for, right? Which is to try to make it as attainable from a market rate standpoint. But I do think this is true that when you purchase a home, you're purchasing a home inclusive of so many different elements, right? Whether that be location, the size of the lot, the size of the home, right? The direction it faces. Some people like west facing, some people like east facing. You can't build the same home, right? Exactly the same basically anywhere, because one's slightly different even in a townhome. And so I think when people analyze what they're purchasing in terms of a home and they're disclosed about what they're purchasing, people make decisions on the price point that they think they'll buy it at, right? And so I don't think it's always dictated, but I guess the point what I'm trying to make is that I think additional property taxes with the PID are part of that analysis, right? Just like an HOA is. Some people choose to buy property within an HOA, some people choose not to do that. I think you're gonna have the same thing here. Some people are gonna choose to avoid buying this product because it's a part of a PID, but that was their choice. But because they have this vehicle in place, they're able to deliver things more rapidly, more quickly, and provide the amenities up front, where this house might not otherwise be there. That's not always the case for this particular instance. But what I'm saying is, it is something that people will bake into the overall price. And one last thing I just mentioned, because I think it's important for, as you have these discussions in Utah, is it is new. It passed since 2018. People are still becoming familiar with these. There's over 150 PIDs created now in the state. They're being used for all large master plan communities and ones that have a lot of offsite. But what I would say is that these tools have been around in other states for decades. They're called CDDs in Florida. They're called PIDs in Texas, right? They're being used for every master plan community. I think there was something on like the top 200 master plan communities in the nation. 98% were using a special district such as these. So I just wanted to say that, you know, I know it's new here, and buyers are going to have to get familiar with it. I think there's going to be some uncertainty going into these first ones, but it is becoming more familiar and it has been used for a long time.
Can you remind me, is this an HOA as well?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
So it is an HOA. Part of the commitment in the developer's agreement is that the front yards will be maintained by the HOA. We're targeting about $110 a month. And the big portion of that is the water and the maintenance and the weeding in the front yards, as well as water for some of the ornamental areas. The pickleball courts, the playground equipment, the raised beds, they don't require as much intense maintenance. And you know, we will have budgets that will take into account the perpetual maintenance on those items over time. The water and front yard maintenance is a big portion of this monthly due for the HOA.
It's something normally homeowners would have to pay for that they're not gonna have to pay for themselves, and it'll all be nice and uniform. They'll be saving them.
Brian or Justin, does this item require a vote at this time, or does it move to approve the governing document of the PID? Would that go to a council meeting?
So, really, at the direction of council, what we would need is, do you need more information? Is there information you would like staff to work with the developer and with their legal counsel on to help you feel more comfortable? I'm trying to think. I was not here in 2021 when we approved the first PID, but
I can talk. Sorry, I don't mean to take over this meeting. Can you hear me? I think it probably helped from like just the next steps. I think the purpose of today's meeting was just to get feedback from the staff. Hear you guys' concerns, hear how we can address them. I understand exactly what the council might be thinking about. And then, you know, essentially, in order to even get one of these approved, there has to be a 2-week noticing period, right, to open it up for a public meeting. And then after public comment, you can technically vote on it afterwards. I don't think that's being asked to rush to that decision right now. I think it's more, let's see what the staff and, you know, questions are and where everybody's thoughts might be. And then we can tailor, you know, or amend the governing document according to some of the feedback that we're receiving to get it more in line with what the council's.
And that transparency continues with the PID board as well. They are required to abide by open meetings laws. Everything essentially they do is transparent as well.
Has our legal department reviewed these documents?
No.
Okay, that will need to happen.
Any other concerns or questions? Yes.
Well,
Counselor Handel.
Yeah, I'm still struggling to hear the but-for argument, and so I think maybe some feedback on that would be helpful for me to feel more comfortable with this. I mean, because we already approved the development agreement, it was agreed upon. So I can understand why the PID is helpful, but I don't see that I'm worried about setting a precedent that after the fact, because as I understand it, most PIDs are created beforehand or during the process of settling on the development agreement. So I'm worried about not being able to point to something specific that this project's now going to have that it wasn't going to have without it. And that seems to be the most important principle of what a PID is for. So if we can hear more about that, that would make me feel more comfortable.
I think my first answer is the ability to pay upfront for the cost initially. It will allow for faster development. And I think the fair distribution of the cost. Sam, I know you were going to.
No, I was just gonna say, let us circle up and come back with a but-for argument, or at least a statement to say like, this is what we believe it is providing.
Isn't it true that the prices will be, the houses will be more expensive?
Overall, if without it.
For the people buying them, the houses will cost more initially.
I think the argument could be made by Lennar that that's the case. Yeah, they're not able to absorb them as quickly, so. You know, because they're not able to put as much online, you're gonna have to wait to hit certain price points to provide the amenities that we're talking about, right, in order to pay for them.
Lennar did just tell us that they're very well capitalized.
That's
So-
true. That doesn't mean that this is less efficient than. What we're saying is this is more efficient capital than what they could get otherwise, right? It's not to say that they don't have efficient capital relative to other developers. But
We don't have a blank check. We have a responsibility to.
But I think
To our staff.
what George is saying is he would, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what he's saying is we would have rather have had this come before us with the zone change. So now we're setting a precedence to do this with you after we'd already agreed with this and after we've already had this contractual environment. And so we don't.
What's the additional consideration?
I would just like to add that we purchased this land from a developer that got that development agreement approved. We did not get the development agreement.
But you did purchase it subject to that development agreement. You knew what you were doing.
And I think what you see too is in Texas, in Colorado, and other places in Florida where they have had PIDs or special service districts for 30 years, that has been the process. Where the PID Act was only passed in 2019 and had, I think the first PID in 2021, the developers, this is now happening in Utah. They didn't start with that, but we're seeing that now. As council, we have been brought on by different players throughout the state, by the bond underwriters or the developer, because the process has been a little bit different in Utah as we get going. Will that always be the case? No, I think essentially the PID request will come earlier in the process as we see happening in other places.
So I guess, and I think you're kind of getting what I'm putting out. We don't want to do this again. We would prefer it to come with the zone changes, is what I'm hearing. So come back to us with a really great argument of why we should be promoting future of it.
I think the feedback is great. What we're hearing, we hear you loud and clear. Like, I think it's for us to go loop in and say, hey, look up, internally and say, hey, look, what are we providing? What is the but for? I would say something that you could do with Brian is create a PID policy that says, hey, we're not going to consider a PID unless you come in during your zone change. Or put something within a PID policy that says if everyone agrees to that, that's how you want to see it. that changes the way that it happens going forward. And maybe this is the exception, right? Because of what they is their argument for why they need it or why it would be helpful. I think you can go and say, going forward, we're going to change this to make sure that we're not going to consider a bid unless you do it at this time.
I was just gonna suggest the exact same thing. I think that's really wise counsel, that if that position is something that the council as a whole believes, I think putting in the policy, probably with some, it's probably gonna have to be some exceptions to it, so then you probably need to define what the criteria for those exceptions are. Now, having said that, I don't know. Bill's still here? Bill left? I think that the last one, I think that the medical school one came after the development agreement too. I think that it actually is probably more likely than not that that's how it will happen, because of exactly what Bill said a few minutes ago, that the developer comes in and gets the zone change and does the development agreement without having actually costed out the entire project, then sells the project, and the builder, when they cost out, realize it doesn't make sense and then is going to come. So I'm totally on board with, if it's the council's will to put into policy that that's not what we want. My guess is that it's probably the more frequent scenario rather than the less frequent scenario.
It has been so far to date. We've seen development agreements. It's been a rare occasion that people are asking for a PID prior to getting the development agreement. But I would say that there also could be the chance that someone wants to ask for a PID and get a development agreement amended in those discussions. So you might not want to close the door entirely, because then potentially you could ask for a development amendment and provide something else that you guys want within the development that you were asking.
How is a PID disclosed to prospective buyers? Is that closing?
Yeah, so it's, if you want to answer that,
I think there's
it's like 6 or 7 times throughout the buying process that they're disclosed.
So the MLA report, the title reports, the disclosures are required to have it as well. So I know for certain it's in 4 different places.
Okay.
We've also had governing documents approved by the city council add additional provisions. So like a separate colored piece of paper in their sales office in a certain font size saying you're subject to this additional tax. So there are other mechanisms that the city council can add, and we've been adding those in as standard to our documents to try to help make sure buyers are fully disclosed.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Betsy. We appreciate your presentation today, and very helpful. We'll look forward to that additional information from you. The council will now consider a motion to close the meeting. Ryan?
We have 2 brief items to discuss in a closed meeting. One involved pending or reasonably imminent litigation, and the other involves character and competence of an individual. As we've discussed many times, those are both reasons for a closed meeting under the statute, so it'd be appropriate for a motion at this time.
Motion to close the meeting by Councillor McKay with a second by Councillor Hoban. Vote, Councillor Ogden?
Yes.
Councillor Football?
Yes.
Councillor Garrett? Yes. Councillor Handley?
Yes.
Councillor McKay?
Yes.
Councillor Hoban?
Yes.
Councillor Christensen?
Yes.
All right, the meeting is adjourned.
Will we be staying on
Recording
this?
stopped.